If people could please stand if they'd like to for the reading of the council prayer and the acknowledgement. And I'll call on Councillor Sinfield to read the council prayer.
Thank you. Almighty God, we humbly seek your blessings upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and to the true welfare of the people of the city of Boroondara. Amen.
And I now call on Councillor Galt to read the acknowledgement of country.
I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people as the traditional owners and original custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today.
Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. Before we commence the meeting, if I could request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. The council meeting is being live streamed on the council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the council website as soon as possible after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jane Addis. I'm the Mayor of Boroondara City Council. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. So seated to my left on the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Nick Stavrou, Councillor Wes Gold and Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth. And then moving round the table, Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Susan Bigger and Councillor Victor Franco. The officers in attendance tonight, Philip Storer, the Chief Executive Officer, Carolyn McLean, Director Community Support, Amy Montalti, Chief Financial Officer, Daniel Freer, Director Places and Spaces, Carolyn Terry, Executive Manager, People, Culture and Development, Mance Bassey, Acting Director, Customer and Transformation, Scott Walker, Director, Urban Living, David Thompson, Manager, Governance and Legal, and Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer. And there are also a number of other officers in attendance this evening, and they'll be introduced as they present their reports. So the first item is apologies. Mr. Thompson, are there any apologies for this evening?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have an apology from Councillor Thompson and Councillor Watson for the meeting this evening.
Thank you very much. Item 1, adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on 29 November 2021. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes? Councillor Sinfield?
So moved.
And seconded Councillor Stavrou. Is anyone opposed to that? There being no one opposed, I'll declare the motion carried. Thank you. Direct declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? Mr. Storer.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I have a conflict in relation to item 7.13 and we'll leave the chamber for that matter.
Thank you, and we'll note that down. Thank you. Item 3, deputations and presentations, petitions, public submissions. Mr. Thompson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are none of the aforementioned for this evening.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is informal meetings of councillors. Councillors, is anyone prepared to move a motion to receive and note the record of informal meetings of councillors as printed in our business papers? Councillor Bigger, and I'm not sure whose light was next. Councillor Gold, maybe, is the seconder. Was it the
Yes.
item on the... Yes,
Yes, it is. Thank you.
For the benefit of the mover and the seconder, is anyone opposed? No lights on, so I'll declare that motion carried. Thank you. The next item is public question time. Council encourages the submission of public questions prior to 12 noon on the day of the meeting. Questions submitted prior to 12 will be provided with a detailed verbal response as well as a response in writing. Those submitted after 12 will receive a verbal response if possible, but will otherwise be taken on notice for a written response to be provided in due course. Mr Thompson, do we have any public questions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have 4 questions with notice that were received prior to 12 noon today, and a copy of those questions have been circulated to all councillors.
Thank you very much. So yes, there are 4 questions, and as mentioned, people will receive a written reply as well. So the first one is from Mr Ian Huntley of Balwyn North, and I believe Mr Huntley has arranged to be online, so is not in the chamber. So the first question is Commonwealth funding for railway car parks. Now this question's been disallowed in accordance with rules 55.1.3 and 55.1.3 of the governance rules. And Mr Huntley will receive a written response to this disallowed question in due course. The second question from Mr Huntley relates to Commonwealth funding for railway park and ride facilities in Glenferrie. The question: whilst the draft placemaking plan for Glenferrie shows that the offer of federal funding on railway park and ride facilities made during the 2019 election campaign is still being assessed by Council, the recent report by the Senate Finance and Public Administration References Committee, which examines severe shortcomings in the relevant federal funding program, shows the project is now at the planning stage. Which of these is the accurate view? And Mr Huntley, thank you for the question, which is being allowed in accordance with Chapter 2 of the governance rules, and that's because the question has previously been put in writing to a councillor or a member of council staff more than 10 days before the council meeting at which the question is submitted. And I'm going to call on the Director, Places and Spaces, Mr Daniel Freer, to respond to this question from Mr Huntley. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Council has undertaken technical feasibility studies for the commuter car parking projects, focusing on determining the car parking yield, cost and project impacts for each site and the overall conditions of the sites in terms of deliverability. At tonight's council meeting, before council is a report seeking endorsement to commence broader community engagement on these projects. Following this period of consultation, analysis of the findings and further consideration will be given, and a decision by council on to whether further progress these projects will be taken at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Freer, and Mr Huntley will receive a written response to the question as well. Now the next question is from Mr Lee Norton of Balwyn North. Thank you, you are there. And the question relates to council procurement policy. And the question is, why, given the public interest in council procurement processes and probity and its place in the Climate Action Plan, has the draft procurement policy not been subject to public exhibition? And again, the question has been allowed in accordance with Chapter 2 of the governance rules, as the question relates to a matter or matters regarding item 7.1 on the council agenda this evening. And I'll call on the Chief Financial Officer, Amy Montalti, to respond to this question from Mr Norton. Thanks, Ms Montalti.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, I thank Mr Norton for his question. Given that the procurement policy is predominantly developed to guide operational procurement processes, there is no legislative requirement under the Local Government Act 2020 for the policy to be subject to a public exhibition prior to adoption. Consultation on the policy did occur with Council's Risk and Audit Committee, and feedback received has been incorporated into the policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Montalti. And Mr Norton, you will receive a written response to your question. Now, there's another question from Mr Norton, and it relates to commuter car parking feasibility. And the question is, will Council publicly release the full report of the survey of community conducted by Wallace Social Research Group and provide an explanation of the validity of the results if, as stated in the report, 17,747 people were randomly contacted for the survey, and out of these, 562 people participated and completed the survey. And again, the question is being allowed in accordance with Chapter 2 of the Governance Rules as the question relates to a matter or matters regarding item 7.11 on the council agenda this evening. And again, I'll call on the Director, Places and Spaces, Daniel Freer, to respond to Mr Norton's question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Pending Council's resolution on the matter this evening, community engagement is proposed to be undertaken over an 8-week period commencing the 14th of December and closing on the 10th of February 2022. As part of the engagement process, the reports regarding the community survey undertaken by Wallace Research Group for each precinct will be made available to the community on Council's website or Engage website. I must say that there's potentially a delay in the accessibility version of the Wallace report at this point in time, so a PDF version will be made available immediately. The percentage of all people contacted who agree to complete the survey is in keeping with market research standards and does not impact on the validity of the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Freer, and Mr Norton, you will receive a written response as well. Now that takes us to the end of questions. So item 6, notices of motion. Mr Thompson, are there any notices of motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are no notices of motion for consideration this evening.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move to presentation of officer reports. Could I just check, does any councillor have any issues or concerns with respect to the order of the agenda, or wish to flag any item for discussion or items which may not need to be discussed, and on that basis councillors would be interested in moving them en bloc? Based on officer advice, there is a possibility to move the following items en bloc. I'll go through them fairly slowly because there's a couple of them just to make sure that you know which ones. So the ones that could possibly be moved en bloc are 7.2, October 2021 monthly financial report, 7.4, Amendment C353 Part 1, Q Individual Heritage Places and Regrading, adoption. 7.5, Amendment C355 Barandara Kurrajong, 337 Auburn Road, Hawthorn, adoption. 7.7, September 2021 Quarterly Performance Report. 7.8, Contract 2021/72 Tree Root Services. 7.9, Contract 2021/101 Drainage Pit Clearances and Associated Services. 7.11, Commuter Car Parking, Feasibility Update and Request to Progress to Community Engagement. And 7.12, Draft Borrandara Bicycle Strategy Community Consultation. So they're the ones that we're considering. If anyone would like to move a motion to consider moving those on block, Councillor Franco?
No, I don't support 7.11 and 7.12 being moved as an en bloc motion. I have general reservations with en bloc motions, but in respect of those two, nor do I support 7.1, but I don't think that was one of the ones you read out.
No. So 7.2 you don't support being moved on block, but the others... And 0.11.
7.11
Yep.
and 7.12 I do not support being moved as an en bloc motion.
Okay. So commuter car parking and draft Borrandara bicycle strategy. Okay. So would anyone be interested in moving a motion to move the others on block? So we'd take out 7.11 and we'd take out 7.12. Councillor Stafford, you're happy to move that motion excluding 1.1 and...
I am.
Yeah. And seconded Councillor Galt?
Happy.
Thank you. So can I just check if anyone's opposed to that motion? No? Look, I might allow the mover to speak to it, given that it's, if you would like to, given that it's of some consequence, or are you happy just for it to be put?
I'm happy to be put.
Okay, thank you very much. All those in favour of moving the motion as listed, thank you very much. That's carried unanimously. So we'll go to item 7.1, the first item, which is Procurement Policy 2021-25, and that's going to be moved by, introduced by Jacinta Stevens, Head of Strategic Procurement and Contracts. No? Yes? Amy Montalto will introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The Procurement Policy 2021-25, included in the report before you, replaces the current procurement policy and has been developed in response to the new Local Government Act 2020. The Act requires Council to adopt a procurement policy by December 2021, and we're bringing this updated policy to Council for adoption this evening. Whilst the procurement policy has been substantially rewritten to meet the requirements of the Local Government Act 2020, it's important to note that the vast majority of key principles have remained consistent, including the policy applies to all contracts for the purchase of goods, services and works, and sets out threshold levels for the type and nature of procurement process to be followed. There is an emphasis on competition and value for money. The policy outlines the public tender and expression of interest process, and all of the main procurement principles in the previous policy still apply. The policy provides a contemporary approach to procuring goods, services and works into the future, with greater emphasis on our community and Council's corporate social responsibility in environmental, social, ethical and local economy outcomes, and is supported by procurement guidelines which you will find attached to the report. Consultation was undertaken with high procurement user departments across the organisation, along with Council's Risk and Audit Committee. Feedback received has been incorporated into the policy. Implementation date for the updated procurement policy is 1 January 2022, as detailed in the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions for Ms Montalto? Councillor Gott, your light's on, I'm assuming you. Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering which part of the policy it is that specifically speaks to sourcing things locally and supporting the local, being Burundara and Australian economies.
Thanks. Through you, Madam Chair. They're contained within the guidelines, so in the social responsibility sustainability guidelines, which are attached as an attachment to the report as well. That's where all the detailed information for officers is contained.
You have a follow-up?
No. I didn't think it was as explicit as perhaps it could have been, but I'll leave my questions there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Franco.
I don't have a question at this stage. I'd just like to note that I do have a motion I'd like to move, which is an amendment to the officer's recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you. So I can't see any lights on for further questions, so I think that might be the time, Councillor Franco.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, but adding a point 4, and point 4 to read that the policy and supporting guidelines be issued for public consultation in the month of February and returning to Council thereafter thereafter. Now, the reason, can I talk to the motion at this point?
Let's just check that that's Councillor Sinfield.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, can I just check that that's going to work? Because it says adopt the procurement policy, that will be okay? Can I just check with governance?
Need to understand what the intent of Councillor Franco.
Point of order, Chair. The motion's been moved and seconded, so regardless of what governance might think, the motion's on the floor and the mover has a right to speak to it.
Okay, well, Councillor Franco.
Thank you. This motion is before us today, and it doesn't include public consultation. I think the policy and the supporting guidelines should be made available in the interests of transparency and open government for public comment and review. There are issues, such as the issue that Councillor Sinfield has raised in terms of local sourcing and procurement, that's of interest to many members of our community, and equally many members of our community with environmental concerns and interests have raised the importance of this policy and having an input to it. I raised this issue myself at our audit committee and the need for this policy to be brought before Council. I'm pleased it is here, and I think I'm conscious that the policy needs to be adopted by the end of the year, and Council has such an obligation. I think we can adopt it and at the same time issue it for public consultation. After it comes back out for public consultation and comes back, if there are any issues that have been raised or no issues, then it can be ratified again. So I commend the motion and the additional, including the point 4 that I've raised, to all my colleagues.
I should have checked, is anyone opposed to this? I think we'd better get it up on the screen. Councillor Franco, is that what you had in mind? Is it? Oh, sorry, it's on my screen. It's up on yours now.
it could simplify it, be issued for public consultation in February 2022, and at the conclusion of this period, the matter be brought back before council. That's fine.
Thank you. Are you comfortable with that now?
Yes, thank you.
And Councillor Sinfield, you were the seconder. Are you happy to second that motion?
I am, thank you.
And can I check if anyone's opposed to that motion? Well, I think I will be, but possibly someone else. So, Councillor Sinfield, as the seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, thank you. I thank Councillor Franco for putting this motion, and I welcome the inclusion of the fourth point there. I think it's very important for our community to be able to express their views on this. They have very strong views from what I understand to date. When the matter comes back before us early next year, it may not require any changes or deletions or inclusions or other considerations, but it may. We have a very intelligent community and I welcome their feedback on it. But this motion also seeks to ensure that we comply with the requirements of the Act by adopting it in its current form, and we can amend that at any stage. So I welcome that and commend it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Well, as I'll be opposing it, I will say just that for me this is fairly procedural, and I'm confident that it does adequately cover what we understand our community wants. So I'll now return to the mover, Councillor Franco.
I've got my light on.
Oh, sorry. It's very hard to see, sorry, behind this screen.
That's fine. I didn't know it was opposed, so since it's opposed, I will speak to it. Although in quite short compass, I'd be interested in some public feedback because I note, for example, at page 17 of the policy, one of the options for procurements between $250,000 and $500,000 is to obtain 6 quotes. And I think sometimes within a bureaucracy, be it state, local or federal, sometimes it's not appreciated just how much work and cost that puts businesses to. And if you knew that you're one of 6 quoting for a job in that sort of range, you may well not be interested in doing it. So I think it'd be interesting to hear also from some of the businesses that respond and participate in procurement activities, because the reality is that is a hell of a lot of quotes for that sort of range, particularly when you're looking at roadworks and the likes that make that sort of amount quite commonplace. So I'd be certainly interested in the benefit of some feedback, at least in respect of those things, and there's no doubt other things that haven't been contemplated. So I think on balance it's worth the exercise.
Thanks very much, Councillor Park. Councillor Franco as the mover.
No, I have no further comments to make. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll now put the motion up on the screen. Those in favour? And those against? So that motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you. So the next item, I think, is 7.3, discontinuance of roads and reserves policy, and I believe Amy Montalti will be presenting that, our Chief Financial Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I'm pleased to present the updated discontinuance of roads and reserves policy. The policy documents how roads no longer reasonably required for access, no longer required for the purpose for which they were originally set aside, or roads being closed for any other purpose, will be discontinued and sold or transferred. The policy is important to ensure transparency, equity and consistency when going through this process. Council's discontinuance of roads and reserves policy has no mandated review or expiry period. However, the policy was last reviewed by Council in 2015. Officers have completed a review of the 2015 policy to ensure it has provided Council with a consistent and unambiguous framework for the progression and settling of road discontinuance projects, including compliance with the new Local Government Act 2020. Key amendments to the policy are outlined in Part 4 of this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Montalti. Councillors, are there any questions? No, I can't see any. So is somebody happy to move a motion? This is like at an auction waiting for the first vote. First bit. Councillor Hollingsworth, you're happy to move?
Happy to move officer's recommendation, thank you.
Thank you. And seconded, Councillor Gillies? Thank you. Is anyone opposed to that motion to assist Councillor Hollingsworth? Okay, so there's nobody opposed. So Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, certainly this policy is timely and, as it was mentioned, 6 years since the last review, so very much support the content and the purpose and the intent, and obviously if there's redundant roads, access roads, reserves to enable commercial value sale of those properties to go to a residential property or property owner that can utilise that and help reduce the burden of the maintenance of an area that's not utilised, then I think this is a good option. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies is the seconder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add that I think this policy adds clarity for the officers, but definitely also for the community. So I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, did you have anything to say to wrap up? I can't see any other lights on.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'll now put that motion. Those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, I think item 7.6 is the next item, which is adoption of Amendment C342 Q Hebrew Congregation Heritage Overlay. And I think that's going to be introduced by Nick Brennan, Senior Strategic Planner. Thanks, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. This report relates to Amendment C342 to the Burundara Planning Scheme, which proposes to place a heritage overlay over the buildings at 53 Walpole Street in Kew, which is also known as 11 Malmesbury Street in Kew. On the 24th of May 2020, Council received a request from a community member to investigate the heritage significance of the buildings. This request was made in response to a planning permit application to expand facilities for a school occupying part of the site, which proposed demolition of many of these buildings. The UPDC resolved on the 7th of September 2020 to seek authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to introduce a heritage overlay across the entire site. Authorisation for Amendment C342 was granted on the 13th of November 2020. Public exhibition of the amendment was carried out between the 18th of February and the 19th of March 2021. On the 17th of May 2021, the UPDC resolved to refer the amendment to an independent planning panel for consideration, and this panel was held from the 22nd to the 30th of July in 2021. 3 submitters appeared before the panel. The panel's report was received on the 13th of September. The panel has ultimately supported Council's position that the heritage overlay be extended over the entire site, subject to some changes to the exhibited heritage citation. At the UPDC meeting on the 8th of November, the UPDC resolved to adopt an updated version of the citation incorporating the changes recommended by the planning panel. The UPDC also recommended that officers engage with the trustees of Norban's Morgan House to ensure any factual errors within the citation were corrected. Accordingly, officers invited the trustees to provide details of those factual errors. In response, the trustees submitted an updated version of the citation. Officers have reviewed the proposed changes and revised the citation where errors could be clearly identified. Further changes were not supported, as it is not considered appropriate to make other changes to the citation beyond which is what has already been exhibited and considered by the panel. Concurrently, on the 22nd of September 2020, Council issued a notice of decision to refuse to grant a planning permit to redevelop part of the site for an expansion of the existing school, which provides an education centre for children with autism. The applicant appealed Council's decision to VCAT. The Minister for Planning subsequently called in the application and referred the matter to the Priority Projects Standing Advisory Committee for advice. Following the Advisory Committee hearing, the Minister for Planning advised Council on the 2nd of September 2021 that he had decided to issue a planning permit for development of the site. The Minister also refused Council's request for an interim heritage overlay on the grounds that this would prevent the permitted development. While the Minister has granted a planning permit implying demolition of buildings on the site and has refused Council's application for an interim heritage overlay, for the time being the buildings remain in place. Issuing a planning permit is no guarantee that the proposed works will take place. The property has been identified as having heritage significance worthy of protection by a heritage overlay. Until there is material change to the site, that significance remains. It's therefore recommended that the Council resolve to adopt the revised heritage citation and to adopt Amendment C342 and to submit the amendment to the Minister for Planning for approval. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr Brennan. Are there any questions for Mr Brennan? Councillor Stavro?
No questions, Madam Mayor, but I would like to move a motion when it's appropriate.
Can't see any other lights on, so now might be the time. Thanks, Councillor Stavro.
Thank you. I would like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Sinfield, you seconding that?
I am.
Thank you very much. To assist Councillor Stavro and Sinfield, is anyone opposed to that? No? Thank you. So would you like to speak to your motion, Councillor Stavro?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. And let me start by thanking the officers for the great effort they've put into producing the report. And sometimes it may look a thankless task when the process doesn't appear predictable. But let me state that your work and unbiased advice is highly valued. We've heard from Mr Brennan the sequence of events, and I think I don't propose to repeat them. Suffices to say that there's a principle at stake here, and I think that principle is that of predictable process. We do live in a great country that understands that sometimes the outcome may be unpredictable, but all of us believe that the process should not feel arbitrary. I think that this issue, one can only assume that it has taken state-level significance for the Minister of Planning to take such an active interest in a local issue and calling in the VCAT application. Look, there may be considerations, but not evident to the Boroondara community, but all parties, I think, would have been very well served if the Minister had waited to receive the full heritage report. That would have been the process, and in a Victoria of due process, not an autocratic decision-making body. I think that's very important to say. I think, rightly, the Minister in the past has strongly admonished us to do more to protect heritage in Boroondara, and I can only hope that the Minister will take his own advice and help us protect Boroondara's heritage in this instance. I plead with my fellow councillors to support the officer's recommendation.
Thanks very much, Councillor Stavro. Councillor Sinfield is the second. And I can't see any other lights on. Councillor Stavro, did you want to say anything to wrap up?
No, I'll leave it at that, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So look, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. So item 7.10 is our next item, which is Contract 2021/226, Retail Energy Procurement Australia Contract 2506 to 0641 electricity, small sites, and that's going to be introduced by Mr. Frere. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. This report seeks to award contract 21/226 retail energy, electricity, small sites. This contract replaces an existing supply contract for electricity supply to council's smaller building sites. The initial sites of the contract are shown in attachment 1, noting that sites can be added or removed during the 3-year term of the contract. The procurement process for this contract was conducted by Procurement Australia, enabling aggregation of sites and an improved purchasing power. The process has also enabled Council to select an accredited green power option, so now that all of Council's electricity will be from renewable sources, given our major sites started using renewable sources 2 years ago. This includes aquatic centres and seasonal pavilions. This will further reduce Council's emission and bring us very close to our 2030 target to reduce actual emissions by 90%. To provide some further detail on this point, the contract is estimated to reduce emissions by a further 2,000 tonnes of carbon per annum. This brings our total emissions down to approximately 4,000 tonnes per annum, which represents an 85% reduction from the 2007 levels. Endorsement of this contract award will enable Council to sustainably purchase electricity for the next 3 years. The officer recommendation is on the screen and I commend that to you.
Thank you, Mr. Frere. Councillor Hollingsworth?
No questions, but happy to move a motion at the appropriate time.
I can't see any other lights on, so now might be the time. Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Look, I'm particularly delighted to have this item brought forward tonight, and I think it's wonderful that Burundara...
Just moving the motion on the screen.
Sorry. Thank you.
Let me just check if there's a seconder. Is somebody happy to second this motion? Councillor Franco? Yes, thank you. And I'll just check, is anyone opposed to the motion? No? So I'll now hand back to you, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Yes, delighted that this is before us this evening. I think it's wonderful that we can now be in a position to have our small sites as well as our large sites operating under clean energy, green energy. And just wanted to again compliment the officers on a very diligent competitive tender process and a comprehensive tender process, and to obviously have this here before us this evening. I'm very grateful, so thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Franco is the seconder.
No further comment.
Okay, thank you. I presume you don't want to say any more to wrap up, Councillor Hollingsworth?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I can't see any lights on, so I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you, I'll declare it carried. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Frere. So our next item is 7.11, commuter car parking. Feasibility update and request to progress to community engagement. And that's going to be presented by Christine White, Manager, Capital Projects. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. The federal government provided feasibility funding of $2.25 million to investigate council-owned car park sites at Hawthorn, Canterbury and Camberwell. The commuter car parking projects provide council with an opportunity to develop precinct-based car parking facilities to support long and short-term car parking for the community. These projects enable the increase in car parking allocations as well as facilitating placemaking outcomes sought in the Mailing Road Place Plan and the draft Glenferrie Road Place Plan. The commuter car parking projects encourages the use of public transport, supports the economic vitality of the shopping precincts and relieves parking pressure on local streets by increasing available off-street parking. Importantly, there is an opportunity to reimagine how safe, amenable and accessible car parking can be developed with improved functionality, including provision of lifts, opportunities for solar panels, electrical charging stations, bike storage and repair stations, and increased greening. This report presents the feasibility works comprised of two main components: the technical feasibility and the market research undertaken through a community engagement survey process, with findings intended to be communicated as part of the broader consultation and engagement phase. In summary, the Office's recommendation is to endorse the draft commuter car park projects as outlined in this report at Glenferrie, Canterbury and Camberwell for the purpose of community consultation commencing from the 14th of December 2021 to the 10th of February 2022. And secondly, following the consultation phase and giving consideration to the community feedback, receive a further report at a future council meeting in 2022, giving consideration to progressing each site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms White. Are there any questions? Councillor Sinfield?
Thank you. I appreciate the period of consultation is perhaps longer than it would ordinarily be given the time of year, but I thought we had a position on avoiding going out over school holiday periods.
Perhaps I might answer this, Madam Mayor, given we also have similar issues with regard to advertising of planning applications which come in. The approach we take is to still advertise over that period but extend the period so that we capture those people who may well have gone away and have returned from holidays. So this is consistent with that approach.
Thank you. Councillor Gold?
No further questions at this point in time, but I'd like to foreshadow a motion when the time's correct.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any other lights on, so Councillor Gold, your motion?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that the officer's recommendation is accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies, you've got your light on to second?
To second, please. Thank you.
Thank you. For the benefit of Councillor Gold and Councillor Gillies, is anyone opposed to this? Councillor Franco, you're opposed? Thank you. So I'll now hand back to the mover, Councillor Gold. Do you wish to speak to your motion?
Very happy to, Mayor. Thank you. I'd like to first thank the officers for a very detailed and thorough study. I've probably, as part of the Glenferrie project, been with this for quite a while, most of the year, and I've seen the amount of work that's gone into this, and from discussions with my fellow councillors, the work that's gone in Canterbury and Camberwell as well. I think it's a huge amount of work, and you've taken the time to consult not only with lots of the community, but to look at many of the technical issues, and certainly I was somewhat opposed at the outset, but I was really wedded to the logic of the whole thing now, and I can see the steps taken to make it a much more palatable proposal. Our proposals the proposals for these car parks are now well anticipated by our community. It's been talked about quite widely, and I now believe it's essential we go back and seek formal comment from a much wider community audience. So I recommend allowing this to go out for that consultation, and I seek your support for that tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Councillor Gillies, would you like to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve for a moment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak or comment? Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I consider this to be one of the most controversial series of projects that this council is embarking down, and we're proposing to consult with the community over the school holidays, commencing now in late December, over the Christmas New period, all the way through January. Admittedly, we've gone to the 10th of February when school starts back, but I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, we could only make it worse by passing this motion on Christmas Eve and having it back on Australia Day. So it's only a tad bit more for what is one of the most significant controversial projects that we're all aware of. I'm going to read out the question that was disallowed and answer it myself from Mr. Hundley. And Mr. Hundley wrote to this council on the Commonwealth threat to withhold funding from councils. In view of the recent reports that the Federal Infrastructure Minister,
Councillor
Paul
Franco,
Fletcher, you're going to disallow my comments and speech?
I think we just need to pause and just get some advice because it was disallowed for a good reason.
I'm proposing to answer it in my own way with my own views, not on behalf of council, but me as an elected councillor passing my view on this issue.
Well, would you like to not read out the question but speak to your view?
Okay, I'll read out my view. And I'll state my view. I'll restate that. I mean, various councils have, and I'll name those councils, they've been in the media, Glen Ira and Bayside, have been threatened with a denial of Commonwealth funding on unrelated projects if these councils were to not accept funding for the railway car parks. Has this council received any such threat? Are we aware of it? What's going on in relation to this? There are probity issues surrounding the use of these funds, the way it's been approached. This council has also been approached by a Senate inquiry, and we have made 2 submissions to that Senate inquiry. The elected councillors haven't been involved in those submissions to the Senate inquiry. I learned about those submissions from members of the public, not from our management team or from colleagues. I think there are some substantive issues here. Now, if we look at the substantive transport issues, is encouraging single occupancy car trips to inner city train stations the transport solution that we champion? Is this a good use of public funds, whether they're from ratepayers or from taxpayers? I mean, it goes to the heart. Is this a good use of funds, and is this the way we want to go down? What is driving this project? And to me, it reads as if we're racing headlong to deliver the Josh Frydenberg promises that he went to the election campaign with. And I question that it's good public policy. I question that it's good transport policy. I don't think we've done the detailed analysis looking at the alternatives and what could really be done and should be done to better support. And I think there's also significant urban design and public domain issues in relation to the delivery of above-ground car parks. These car parks are for effectively single occupancy trips to be parked there all day. They're not necessarily there to support the retail sector with short stay parking.
We have 3 minutes as well.
Thank you. I'll leave it there. I'll be voting against.
Yes, Mr Storer would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is not to enter the debate, but just to ensure councillors have the facts in front of them in coming to the view you're being asked to reach. The first of which is that the proposition for consultation is consistent with Council's approach, as I said earlier, more generally, and we have in fact extended the time even beyond where we would normally extend it for our community to provide us with feedback. The other point I would make is that in relation to the response to the Senate inquiry, we were simply asked for facts as to when it is that Council received certain requests from the federal government in relation to the program. So we've provided those facts. There is no opinion on what has been expressed to them. Had there been, we would have been in front of Council asking for your direction. So I just want to be clear that that is what we've actually done. The other point I would make is that Council has not received any correspondence from the federal government in relation to its potential unwillingness to proceed with the program, as has perhaps been the case for Glen Ira and Bayside councils. Burundara has not received any such correspondence.
Thank you, Mr Storer. Councillor Sinfield, you wish to speak to the motion?
I do, thank you. I welcome this matter coming before us, and I welcome the motion. I think going out to community consultation is a very important part of this project, and I welcome the community's feedback on it. I'm delighted to see that the period of consultation is substantially larger than it would ordinarily be, taking into consideration the school holiday period and festive season. It's taken a very long time to get to this point, and I acknowledge the officers, it's no fault of yours, but it's a very complex matter that we're dealing with, and there's a whole heap of other ancillary things going alongside it. Albeit that this project is not one that we initiated, it's one that was asked of us, I suppose, by the federal government. I welcome commuter car parks and 3 of them in this report in our municipality, reducing the congestion in the CBD and reducing the kilometres people take to get to work and providing an alternative to them. Although I hope that should these car parks go ahead and be provided for our community, that they will not in any way take away on-street car parking provided for a very different purpose, not commuters, provided for shoppers to support our local economy. These are 2 very separate projects, and I don't want to see those waters get muddied. Can I ask, not to be necessarily incorporated in the motion, but can I ask of officers that a copy of this report and the resolution, once passed, be provided to the federal member? Thank you.
That's been noted. Thank you. Councillor Park.
Just to speak briefly to it, I support the motion. I think that car parking remains one of the very significant problems for the residents of Burundara, and on that basis I welcome the proposed infrastructure, because whatever alternatives people might like to proffer, the reality is that this is going to be an issue for many, many years to come, and so little money has been spent in recent decades on the provision of car parking infrastructure that I think this is a magnificent opportunity that needs to be embraced.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I would agree with Councillor Park that car parking continues to be a challenge for people in Burundara, though I'm not completely convinced about what the right solution is to that. And I do share some of Councillor Franco's concerns about this this piece of work. And I have had concerns expressed previously about the timing of this community consultation, though I am relieved that it has been extended somewhat into February, which I do think is an important step. I'm going to support this motion because it's a decision to consult only. Ultimately, Council will be briefed on the consultation, the feasibility studies, and to determine if any or all of these car parks will go ahead. And I think that that's the right process. But it is important, and I hope that our community, as Councillor Franco has noted, because this is significant and potentially controversial, and very important, really, for regardless of where the funds come from, it is still very important. These are major projects, and so I would hope that our community does come forward, step off the beach, and take the time to put in a submission to this important issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Bigger. Councillor Gillies, you reserved your right. Did you want to speak?
Just in support, thank you, Chair, but to agree with those who have said parking is of great interest and need to our community. So where parking is proposed definitely warrants public consultation, and this is the next right step to take, is to go to public consultation and then re-examine it. So I support and thank those who wish to support the next steps being undertaken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, I can't see any other lights on, so I'll go back to Councillor Gold as the mover to close the debate.
Thank you, Mayor. My only hesitation in supporting the officer's recommendations is in item 1 and referring it to as commuter car parking only. It most certainly is commuter car parking, but in 2 of the examples, Glenferrie and certainly Camberwell, it's the car parks proposed serve a much bigger purpose than that. And much of the work that's been done over last year and previous years has been looking at how we revitalise the 2 shopping centres adjacent to it. And it's a key concern with the interest in strip shopping centres dropping away due to online ordering and then the problems with the pandemic. And I think it's essential. I'm very excited about the possibility of getting Glenferrie Road upgraded, even Camberwell Junction upgraded. And these are key first steps to doing that. And it not only provides, the car parks proposed not only provide for the parking displaced by making way for more pedestrian and cycle areas, they do provide some longer term parking, that is clear, but not just for commuters. There's other needs for that. I certainly know shop owners in Glenferrie Road, and I'm sure it's exactly the same happens in Camberwell, leave their stores every couple of hours and shuffle their cars around. We have long needed some longer term parking, and it happens to be wrapped in with some commuter car parking. My initial concerns did relate to the commuter car parking, but I understand and have been advised and briefed that there have been quite detailed studies on the likely source of the people using it. And by and large, there are not people driving in from Box Hill, stopping halfway and taking the train. There are majority people coming from our own municipality and using the train, etc., etc. So it basically serves our community, and there is a lot of, you're right, it is controversial, these car parks, and I think the only way we can move forward and get it finally resolved is to get formal, widespread feedback to the proposals. I think this step is absolutely essential, and I recommend you support it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galt. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against?
I call a division, thanks.
Thank you. So, okay. Yes, so look, I'll declare the motion carried, and then we'll put the motion again. So all those in favour? Councillor Park, Councillor Sinfield, Councillor Stavrou, Councillor Gold, Councillor Hollingsworth, Councillor Gillies, Councillor Bigger and Councillor Addis, and those against? Councillor Franco. Thank you. So I'll declare the motion carried. Thank you. Now the next item is 7.12, Draft Borrandara Bicycle Strategy Community Consultation. And that's going to be presented by Jim Hondrakis, Manager, Traffic and Transport. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. The Burundara Bicycle Strategy sets out the framework to improve bicycle infrastructure and increase mode share in the City of Burundara. The current bicycle strategy was adopted in 2008 and is due for renewal. The development of the new draft strategy commenced with community and stakeholder consultation to identify issues and opportunities for consideration. The strategy involves two distinct documents, a draft strategy and a draft implementation plan. The draft implementation plan includes a range of projects and other initiatives to support safer and connected bicycle routes. It lists actions with an estimate of costs to be undertaken in the first 2-year period. The plan is intended to be reviewed and renewed every 2 years over the life of the strategy. For the first 2 years, the estimated cost to deliver a range of projects is in the order of $4.9 million. This cost would be considered as part of Council's annual budget process to provide an annual allocation. Officers would also pursue external funding opportunities through both state and federal government avenues. For years 3 to 10, an indicative rate for anti-dooring bike lanes, similar to what we have on Glenferrie Road, is in the order of $500,000 per kilometre. For physical separation measures, an indicative rate is $550,000 per kilometre. For the Department of Transport main roads that are listed, such as High Street, Doncaster Road, Bulleen Road, Camberwell Road, Glenferrie Road, Burke Road, Stanhope Grove, Yarra Boulevard and Taronga Road, the estimated cost is in the order of $10.8 million for almost 20 kilometres. Traffic management costs would be in the order of $870,000. These rates would guide Council's funding advocacy for treatments on main roads. For Council roads, such as Greythorn Road, Highfield Road, Union Road and Mont Albert Road, the estimated cost is in the order of $5.6 million for 10.2 kilometres. Again, traffic management costs are estimated in the order of about $330,000. Some key features of the draft strategy include separate path facilities for pedestrians and cyclists on high-use shared paths, use of separation curbing for on-road bicycle lanes, lower speed limits for strategic on-road bicycle links, and new path links in reserves and parks. Importantly, these initiatives would involve investigation, consultation, and would be presented to Council for consideration and approval. Officers are seeking approval to commence community consultation on the draft strategy and draft implementation plan. Following community consultation, the draft strategy and draft implementation plan are intended to be refined and presented to Council for formal consideration and adoption early in 2022. Further details are included in the report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr Hondrakis. So, Councillor Franco, you had a question.
Just a question about the consultation period. Would that go through to the end of February? Can that go through to the end of February?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes it can. We would commence tomorrow and can go to the end of February.
Thank you. Can we... Okay.
So, maybe we'll get to that in a minute when somebody moves a motion. Any other questions? Councillor Bigger?
But I would like to move a motion when the time is right.
Can't see any other lights on. So were you seeking to add?
I am. I would like to move the officer's recommendation with the amendment that we consult till the end of February 2022.
Thank you.
So we don't have a date.
Just get the words up on the screen.
Should we put a starting and closing date on it?
Apparently we can. Did you want to? Let's just check what the officers had in mind. Mr Hondrakis, did you have a timeline?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we can commence tomorrow and conclude at the end of February.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger, does that look like what you had in mind as your motion?
Yes, I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Franco, you happy to second? Yes, I am. Thank you. For the benefit of Councillor Bigger and Franco, is anyone opposed to the motion up on the screen?
No, but it's not on the screen. Could I ask that it goes back up so that I can finish reading it, please?
You're right, the screen's blank. Okay, so is anyone opposed to the motion up on the screen? No. Okay, so thank you. So I'll now go back to the mover. Councillor Bigger, would you like to speak to your motion?
Indeed, I would. I won't speak for long because we have no opposition, but COVID has changed many things for us. And I think a view of cycling and our shared path network would have to be seen as one of those. We've had increases of up to 300% increases in use of some of those path networks. And as people know who've spent much time on things like the Gardeners Creek Trail, it can be like a free motorway in terms of congestion these days, which is great in many ways. But it is a sign that maybe it's time to rethink this. Another reason I think that this is clearly an overdue piece of work is that, as Mr. Hondarakis noted, the last plan was a 10-year plan, and it was begun in 2008. So we're overdue. It's more than enough time. This will be a 10-year strategy with an implementation plan renewed every 2 years. So this is critically important. We know that safety is the major obstacle, not just in Berndarra, but in really around the world in all studies in terms of getting people to cycle and even people to walk and feel confident walking. So I do believe that this cycling strategy will provide a healthy alternative to some of the congestion problems we've had. It's emissions friendly, it's congestion busting. It's clearly popular. The Berndarra Community Plan has shown that. So I do think that now is cycling's moment, and I look forward to hearing the community's view of that. And I would encourage my fellow councillors to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Franco, as the seconder, would you like?
Can I reserve my right to speak at the end?
Well, I can see Councillor Hollingsworth's light on, so I will, even though no one's opposed, I will.
Yeah. Look, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to echo Councillor Biggar's comments and comment that obviously through 2 years of COVID and 6 lockdowns, we've certainly realised how valuable our community appreciates the opportunity to utilise bike paths and shared access points, and we've had such a strong increase in physical activity, but also in the e-mobility scooters and bikes as well. And so I agree this is very timely, very much supported. And being the council that represents the Linden ward that abuts the Solway ward, one of the most common engagements I have from community is that people are very anxious to see the shared path continued over Toorak Road, and I hope in time that that will also be realised in the years ahead and then make the trails even safer. But thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Franco.
I'll be brief. I concur with the views about COVID and the explosion in cycling. We have been inundated as a council with feedback from the community asking us to do more in terms of cycling. And I also want to make the observation as Gardiner Ward councillor where the Gardeners Creek Trail is, we do have congestion and it is concern to pedestrians, and I think one of the important things in this cycling plan is that it's recognising the congestion, it's recognising the conflict that's occurring. We just have so many people on our trails, they are so popular, we need to start looking at more innovative ways of trying to address this and trying to reduce that pedestrian cycling conflict. It's real, and I'm conscious of that. I'm on the trails myself, and I think with some of the new facilities that are foreshadowed, that have long been discussed, such as the Hawthorn to Box Hill Trail, that's a separate option that hopefully won't have those interfaces, and some of the on-road cycling treatments that will hopefully reduce some of the congestion on the paths, the separation issue, opportunities that are flagged there. I very much look forward to some of the feedback in terms of that. So hopefully it's a win-win for a broader segment of the community and not just cyclists. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Franco. Councillor Biggar, as the mover, is there anything you'd like to add before we put the motion?
One thing, because I would be terribly remiss if I did not thank the officers who have done an extraordinary amount of work on this already, just to get to this point. It's been a vast effort, and I really thank them for their professionalism and their patience and hard work on this.
Thanks, Councillor Biggar. I think we'd all echo that. So look, I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So I declare the motion carried. Now the next item is 7.13, which Mr Storr is going to leave the chamber for. And this item is proposed CEO employment and remuneration policy, and it's going to be introduced by Carolyn Terry, Executive Manager, People, Culture and Development. Thanks, Ms Terry.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. In accordance with Section 45 of the Local Government Act 2020, all Victorian councils are required to develop and adopt a CEO employment and remuneration policy by the 31st of December this year. The proposed policy meets the requirements of the Act and is also consistent with the provisions in the contract of the current CEO. Officers recommend that Council resolves to adopt the policy as proposed.
Thank you, Ms Terry. Councillor Park, you have a question for Ms Terry?
Thank you. I have just one question, that is the composition. I understood that we were expecting this would be constituted by all councillors, and that doesn't appear to be what's presented here. So I'd just be interested in some commentary around that, and I'd also like to foreshadow a motion.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor. The recommendation is that an advisory council be appointed with a subset of councillors to manage the logistics of the process. However, that council would only be advisory and would act in a recommending capacity to the whole of council for any decision making.
Does that answer your question, or you've got another one, Councillor Park?
No, I have no further questions. I'll address my concern by way of a motion.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield, have you got a question?
I do. I have a follow-up to Councillor Park's question, and I'm wondering where in the policy I must have missed it. It explicitly says that it's to be an advisory committee.
Let me find the piece. Section 5.2.
Thank you. I'll leave my questions and comments there in anticipation of perhaps knowing what Councillor Park might do next.
Any other questions? Councillor Franco.
Look, I'd just like to foreshadow the same as Councillor Sinfield. I'd like to hear Councillor Park's motion, but I may have some questions. I appreciate that may be out of the...
That may not be possible if once we've got a motion. So have you got any questions you'd like?
No, the question I had was the one that Councillor Park asked.
Okay, thank you very much. So I can't see any other lights on, so we'll go back to Councillor Park. You have a different motion that you...
I do. It will perhaps be a little bit time-consuming because I didn't have the opportunity to deal with this in advance of the meeting. But essentially, I'm moving that Council resolve to adopt a CEO and employment remuneration policy as annexed to the minutes, but amended tonight, and the effect of the amendments would be to make this a committee of the whole of council, rather, so the provisions that relate to constitution of the committee would change, that it be read that it's all councillors, and that it be a delegated committee. So I'll perhaps stop there for the sake of a seconder being sought. And it might be that there's a need to move a suspension of standing orders, or alternatively an adjournment. But firstly, perhaps if we could see if anybody's willing to second.
Let's just... I think we need to see it up on something on the screen, don't we?
The words of the motion actually won't be significantly different in form. They'll be very different in substance, because the substance is in the policy that we adopt, and that unfortunately is going to need a bit of a rewrite this evening. But I don't think it would take more than about 10 minutes of concerted effort. So if there's a seconder, perhaps at that juncture, I could also move that the meeting be adjourned for a period of 10 minutes, if that has support.
Okay, well, I guess we can seek a seconder on the basis of something we're not quite sure of and that we're going to adjourn to discuss. Councillor Sinfield, you're...
I'm happy to second the motion as just discussed by Councillor Park, and I'm also happy to second the suspension.
Thank you.
Or adjournment, rather.
Perhaps.
I think that's probably more appropriate.
Adjournment, yep. Okay, so let's just... I'm just not sure we can actually move a motion that's not up on the screen. Just let me check.
Well, we can, but essentially it will be the same motion. So that's the motion. If you want to see what the motion looks like, the document that's to be annexed to the minutes is the one that needs to be amended.
Mm-hmm. I think they're going to be there in a moment.
That may be the effect of the motion. There might be some consequential amendments, and hence the desire to seek a brief adjournment.
Would you be happy to move the adjournment before we move this motion? I think that might be safer.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, so Councillor Park's moving that we have a brief adjournment. Councillor Sinfield was happy to second. Is anyone opposed to that? So I'll put the motion that we have a brief adjournment. Thank you. That was carried unanimously. So we're now adjourned, councillors. Councillors, can I have a motion to
So moved.
resume the meeting? And seconded, Councillor Sinfield.
Yes.
Those in favour? That's carried unanimously, thank you. So the meeting is now resumed. Councillor Park, you had a motion?
Yes, I move the motion as displayed on the screen.
And Councillor Sinfield, I think you were seconding? Thank you. For the benefit of the mover and seconder, is anyone opposed? No, there's no one opposed, so I'll go back to Councillor Park.
Look, I'll be very brief because we've got a further meeting after this one. The effect of this change in motion is simply that it means that this committee will be constituted by the whole of council, and to the extent possible, the powers of council in respect of this area will be delegated to that committee for the purposes of efficiency. That's probably all I need to say.
Thanks, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield as the seconder.
It's not opposed. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. Councillor Stavrou, we don't normally speak when it's not opposed, but did you want to say something briefly?
I'm not going to oppose it, Madam Mayor. I think it's the will of the council. The only thing I would say is that I understand the rationale, but I do have some misgivings about the efficiency of it, but I'm willing to give it a try.
Thank you. Councillor Park, did you? No. So look, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Ms Terry. So general business is our next item. Councillors, are there any items of general business? We do have one, which I'll go to, and then I think we can press on while the CEO is brought back in. There is one item of general business, which is Councillor Thompson has requested a leave of absence for tonight, 13th of December. Just to let you know that prior to the meeting, Councillor Thompson did inform governance of his request to be given a leave of absence for tonight's council meeting. I'm therefore in search of a motion. Councillor Gold, your light's on. Are you? I was sorry. Yeah, we've got Councillor Watson on the screen. Councillor Sinfield.
Happy to move that.
Okay, and seconded Councillor Park.
I was just going to suggest that perhaps the motion could also encompass Councillor Watson.
She did actually request it, didn't she? Let me just check with governance. She didn't actually request it. Okay. Okay. Councillor... who moved it? Sorry, Councillor Park.
Councillor Hollingsworth, I think, moved it.
I think Councillor Sinfield moved it and Councillor Park was seconding.
I'm happy to second it.
I'm happy to move it, either way, with the inclusion of Councillor Watson.
Okay, and seconded by Councillor Park with the inclusion of Councillor Watson. Good. So, okay, so I don't think anyone's opposed to that motion, so I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And Councillor Galt, you had your light on for an item of general business?
Yes, I did. I'm not too sure I'm the one that should be doing this, but I've noted that David Thompson this is his last council meeting tonight, and I would like to extend the gratitude of council for your many, many years of service. I've just been checking, and I think it's 15 or more. Good heavens. And I'm probably the least qualified to move this, but I remember when I entered the chambers on the first day, you said, Councillor Galt, by yourself you're absolutely powerless. As a group of 11, you're all powerful. Now, whilst I disagree at the end of the day with both of those statements, they do set the tone for council and helped us adjust to our time here, because you probably gave all new councillors the same advice, which was very well received. I also thought that in the unlikely event that I ever found myself up in the hot seat, I would be very pleased to have you next to me, correcting me and setting me in the right direction. So when you said you were going, I thought that was very unlikely to be a problem, but there is a very small chance I may occasionally find myself up there, and I am very concerned that you won't be next to us. So just from one least qualified to say it, thank you very much, and we wish you all the best in Stonington.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I do have a separate matter to raise, but following on from Councillor Galt's comments, I too would like to thank Mr Thompson for his guidance, his frank and fearless advice, and for continually upholding the standards of the council amongst the other officers. Your performance is second to none, and I thank you for your diligence and years of service.
You will be very much missed. Yes, yes. Councillor Sinfield, you had another item?
Thank you. Yes, I would just briefly like to raise as a matter of general business the continued influx of correspondence that I dare say I'm not alone in receiving in relation to the state of our parks and gardens. I would like to once again flag that with the CEO and perhaps flag it for a discussion at a CB&D to see when we might be able to get back on track and resolve this. It's been some time since our storms and higher than expected rainfall, albeit that the Bureau of Meteorology has said that we are now in La Nina and we will continue to receive higher than expected rainfall. But I'm very conscious of the feedback received from the community that we're not meeting their expectations at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. I wonder if Mr Freer could perhaps just take the councillors through what's actually happened.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. There are two essential issues that we've been dealing with. One has been around open space, mowing and maintenance, and then the second in regard to the clean-up from the storm, and I've forgotten the date, I'm sorry, and the large amount of tree removals that have been associated with that. I can't recall the exact number, but over 2,000 requests for tree removal related or branches and the like resulting from that storm. We have been working through particularly the tree matters in an order of priority around our roads, buildings and safe. I guess as a safety as a priority. Have been working more recently through all of our open space and curbside collections as well across the city. We have then had to manage that around mowing, so particularly where there are trees down in open space. We've had difficulty getting mowers through in those areas with the trees there and then not wanting to mow up and around them and coming back and removing a tree and then trying to get a mower to come back again. So it's been a bit of a juggling act. Our open space contractor citywide has had a spate of COVID-related issues with their workforce and have had difficulty in providing a full complement of staff to manage our contract, and similarly they are having the same issue across a number of other councils that they service. We have provided them last week with a formal notification under the contract of our expectations, and we expect to see things returning to normal in the coming week.
Thank you. And Mr Storer wanted to add something.
Just thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Just to also ask if councillors could make sure you're sending through any of the complaints you've got, so we've got a good record of those and we can make sure to respond to every single one. So I'd be keen to see each of those. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Sinfield, you've got your light on.
Just as a point of clarification, I'm not receiving any calls or emails in relation to the storm damage and the trees down. I think that's been largely dealt with, and I appreciate the social media effort in relation to updating our community on that. It is really just around the maintenance of open spaces with mowing that is still of note. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Franco, you had an item of general business?
I'd just like to add to the same one and to the same discussion on the maintenance of our parks and gardens. I too have been receiving correspondence and queries in relation to this, and I welcome hearing from the Director and the CEO that formal notice has been given under the contract, because the standard response that we've been given about inclement weather and the difficulty of putting large machines on it, etc., and that the contractor's staff has staffing problems or difficulties, doesn't really convey the sense that we've taken our steps as the client to require our contractor to meet the expectations that we have. So perhaps at some point we could make more of a public statement in relation to our expectations and what is being done. I appreciate it's difficult, but there is a lot of angst out there and concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. And I've got one other item of general business. I think Carolyn Terry has gone, our Executive Manager, People, Culture and Development. It's her last evening with us at a council meeting, so I also wanted to thank her. I think she's probably been here, about 6 or 7 years? Something like 6 years, and thank her on behalf of us all for all the work she's done for us over those years. I was going to say something about Mr. Thompson, but he wants us to say it in private. Thank you. The next item is urgent business. Councillors, are there any items of urgent business? There being none, confidential business. We do have one item of confidential business. So, councillors, I'm in search of a colleague moving the following motion. Which is that in accordance with section 66(1) and 66(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 2020, the meeting be closed to members of the public for the consideration of the agenda item titled 10.1 Waste Reforms. This agenda item is confidential information for the purposes of section 3(1) of the Local Government Act 2020, because the item is council business information, being information that would prejudice the council's position in commercial negotiations if prematurely released. 3(1)(a). Now, councillors, Sinfield, you're happy to move that?
So moved.
And seconded, Councillor Biggar?
Yes, thank you.
And I don't believe... is there anyone opposed? No? So I'll just put that motion. Those in favour? Thank you. So that motion is carried. So I'll declare the meeting closed to the public. So to members of the community watching tonight's proceedings, the live stream will cease while confidential business is being discussed, and we will reopen the meeting to the public at the conclusion of the discussion. And if members of the public could please depart the gallery, and we'll let you know when the meeting is reopened. Thank you. Thank you. So to members of the community watching tonight's proceeding, welcome back to the live streaming of the council meeting. This is the end of council business for the evening. Before I close the meeting, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening and wish you the compliments of the season. And I declare the council meeting closed, and goodbye for now. Thank you.
Sorry, through you, councillors. Thompson is not here tonight. We need to start the Urban Planning Delegated Committee by 8:30 p.m. So therefore, I'm in search of a motion. First of all, I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee open. I'm in search of a motion for the election of a temporary chairperson. Councillor Addis.
Councillor, could I suggest that Councillor Park chairs the meeting?
Do I have a seconder for that?
You do.
Councillor Park, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other nominations? There being no further nominations, I declare Councillor Park elected as temporary chairperson of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee for this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Park.
Back by popular demand, hey? I might start by seeking a adjournment for 10 minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Sinfield and seconded by Councillor Bigger. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. I will start by seeking a motion to resume, moved by Councillor Sinfield, seconded by Councillor Stavru. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones be turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if need be, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jim Park and I'm the temporary chairperson for the committee this evening. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated at the horseshoe table to the left, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Nick Stavru, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, and across the other side of the table we have Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger and Councillor Victor Franco. Officers in attendance tonight, seated behind Councillor Stavru is the Chief Executive Officer Philip Storer, and seated next to him is Daniel Freer, Director of Places and Spaces. Seated to my immediate left is David Thompson, Manager of Governance and Legal. To his left, Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer. Seated to my right is Scott Walker, the Director of Urban Living. And we also have David Cowan, the Acting Manager of Strategic and Statutory Planning. There are a number of other officers in attendance tonight who will be introduced as they present reports. Essentially, the purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. Councillors are familiar with the reports, which include a summary of the objections received. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I'll then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you are making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please don't repeat what earlier speakers have said, and we ask that you keep your submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please inform the committee why you're opposed and suggest an alternative approach which would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than on matters of history or detail in the officer's report. Note that there's a strict time limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chairperson I reserve the right to vary that time, I seldom do. I'll ask that speakers sit at the end of the horseshoe table, and I will invite those speaking against to speak first, followed by those speaking in favour. At the 2.5 minute mark, I'll make that sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. Apologies, Mr Thompson, we have some apologies.
Through you, Councillor Park, we have apologies for Councillor Thompson and Councillor Watson for this evening.
Thank you. Turning to the agenda, item 1, adoption and confirmation of minutes. There are none to adopt for this meeting. Item 2, declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any such declarations? No? That takes us then to presentation of officer reports. 3.1, 135 Barkers Road, Kew, Xavier College Senior Campus. That report will be presented by Daniela Splitgerber, Senior Statutory Planner. Thank you.
Through you, Mr Chair. I present UPDC item 3.1 for the development plan for Xavier College Senior School located at 135 Barkers Road, Kew. This development plan proposes to supersede the approved 2006 master plan. The projects on the 2006 plan have been completed with the exception of the change rooms and spectators shelter to the north of Plunkett Oval to be constructed into the existing embankment. It is noted the change rooms and shelter already have a planning permit, however are included in the new development plan as well, given they are not yet constructed. The campus is located on the northern side of Barkers Road and bound by Charles Street to the east. The campus abuts residential interfaces to the north, and to the west abuts an at-grade car park and multi-storey building owned and operated by Vic Roads. The site is located within the Neighbourhood Residential Zone Schedule 1 and affected by a development plan overlay and a heritage overlay. The development plan is required because the site is located in the development plan overlay. Pursuant to clause 43041, a permit cannot be granted for any buildings and works on the site until a development plan has been approved. Following an approval of a development plan, separate planning permit applications are required to be lodged for each building. The design of individual buildings will be detailed in any future planning permit application stages, and pursuant to clause 43042 of the planning scheme, any permit granted must be generally in accordance with the approved development plan. The Minister for Planning is the responsible authority for the development of land for an education centre if the estimated cost of development is $3 million or greater. As such, the developments outlined in the proposed development plan will be lodged with Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. The applications will then be referred to Council for review and comment. The college is affected by the heritage overlay and is included on the Victorian Heritage Register. Pursuant to clause 43013, no permit is required under the overlay to develop a heritage place which is included in the Victorian Heritage Register. Therefore, any heritage impacts are to be considered by Heritage Victoria rather than Council. It is noted that Council's Heritage Advisor has had the opportunity to review the Year 7 and 8 building component of the project and is supportive of the proposal as it will be sited appropriately adjacent to existing heritage buildings on campus. Public consultation of the development plan has been undertaken and formal notification of the plan to nearby residents and owners was carried out between May and October 2021 on 3 separate occasions due to amended plans. Xavier College also conducted a public drop-in information session on the 25th of May 2021, advising the neighbours of the development plan application. 42 submissions were received. Xavier College is an established educational institution. The location of the school remains unchanged and the grounds are not proposed to expand. The development plan incorporates the new buildings within the existing campus. The plan seeks to address the site's increasing capacity due to the forthcoming closure of the Xavier Cosca Hall campus in Brighton. The development plan includes the following key elements: an increase in staff numbers from 180 to 220, an increase in student numbers from 990 to 1,500, an increase in student boarders from 57 to 100, an increase in car parking spaces from 249 to 350 to 400 spaces during school hours. Please note, to clarify wording on page 5 of the officer's report, the number of parking spaces proposed is a total of 350 to 400 spaces. Construction of a new multi-storey building for Year 7 and 8 students adjacent to the northern boundary between Gellibrand Street and Stanley Street. A new car park under the existing Chapel Oval to accommodate additional car parking requirements. A new multi-storey boarding house in the northwest corner of the college. A new multi-storey teaching and learning building to replace the existing boarding house. Extension of existing sports facilities. A new maintenance building on the western boundary. And widening of the crossover to Barkers Road. With the exception of buses, this will include all right turns out of the site band between 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. and 6 p.m, consistent with 40-kilometre school zones. For point of clarification, the maximum height referring to the learning and teaching building in the officer's report is 15.2 metres. The endorsement of the development plan itself does not provide any authorisation for the proposed buildings and works. and where a planning permit is required, this must be applied for after the development plan has been approved. However, it should be noted that any future planning permit applications will be exempt from notice and appeal rights under the provisions of the development plan overlay. It is considered that the development plan represents an appropriate response to the site and surrounds and reasonably contemplates the future of the school and is an appropriate site-responsive development proposal. Subject to changes reflected in the proposed conditions, the development plan is considered to provide an acceptable balance between accommodating the school's future development needs while moderating the impact on the surrounding residential area. It is recommended that Council approve the development plan subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. We have 5 speakers tonight, 2 against and 3 in favour. The first speaker is Nicholas Hardy. Could you come forward, please? And Mr Hardy will be followed by Michael Mulcahy, just so that you're ready. Mr Hardy, if you could commence your 3-minute presentation with your name and the suburb in which you reside, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Nick Hardy. I live in Hawthorn. I'm here today to represent the over 100 residents on Barkers Road and to preserve the relevant existing amenities such as parking that we have. I'd like to begin by thanking Xavier College for deleting the intersection. That was the primary goal in our opposition. And I'd like to also just note for clarity that we're strongly supportive of all works that they're doing within the constraints of their school themselves. In fact, we're quite supportive of that. So why am I here today then? The reason I'm here today is that given the nature of the planning scheme and the relevant overlays that are applicable to the school, I would like for it to be noted, rather we would like for it to be noted by the members present tonight in passing any motion that any approved development plan, for absolute clarity, does not include or contain any opportunity to install a signalised intersection or any works to Barkers Road other than the widened crossover that we currently have seen on the plans. I want it to be made very clear that a number of private residents and private people have expended considerable expense and undergone substantial angst in opposing an intersection and other works. In fact, some property owners have put their houses up for sale. And that's it, well under 3 minutes. But that's my request, that if we do pass this motion, that we make it abundantly clear and note that there is no opportunity under the current approved development plan to progress an intersection or any works within Barkers Road.
Thank you. Let me just check before you leave that there's no questions. It doesn't appear so. So thank you for your presentation. If you return to the gallery. And Mr Mulcahy, if you can come forward. And again, if you could commence your presentation with your name and the suburb in which you reside, thanks.
Mulcahy, and I'm a resident of Kew. I'm speaking to you as a representative for the residents of Stratford Avenue who've submitted objections to the Xavier Development Plan during its various editions in 2021. Our concerns now specifically relate to the construction phase of the boarding house and maintenance complex, which will take place, it seems, from around 2024 onwards. By way of context, Stratford Avenue is located at the northwestern end of the Xavier campus. It is a quiet, narrow and therefore effectively one-way cul-de-sac which runs from Wellington Street through to Xavier's Gate 8 and the current tennis courts. Our residents were pleased when the school removed its plans to construct an interim car park on these same tennis courts after it was acknowledged that the narrow and one-way nature of our street would make this a very unworkable and dangerous proposition for residents and students alike. Ironically, however, our remaining concern again relates to Xavier's plans to use Stratford Avenue, this time for heavy vehicles associated with construction of the boarding house and maintenance complex, despite the fact that Xavier has already conceded that the features of our street make it unsuitable for additional traffic flow. We note that during the construction phase of these buildings, our street will be used by large trucks and heavy vehicles as a thoroughfare to deliver materials, and this same point is highlighted on page 71 of the Planning Officer's report where it states, quote, that the proportion of heavy vehicles associated with the site utilising Stratford Avenue is anticipated to increase. As residents, we are extremely concerned that such vehicles will create congestion and impede traffic flow. This will detrimentally affect access and egress to residents' properties, impact on the amenity of the street, and again create a dangerous situation for students and residents. When we have raised this point about the movement of large trucks in our previous objections, we suggested that the option of utilising the Vic Roads car park should be considered. This suggestion is noted on page 90 of the report, but unlike most other objections, there are unfortunately no planners' comments addressing this one. The Vic Roads Road and car park, which runs off Barkers Road along the adjacent western boundary of the school, has been virtually empty for 2 years since the advent of COVID. Since the final lockdown finished a month or two back, the car park has shown no signs of reuse, and with the option of working from home now appearing to be a reality for most Vic Roads employees, it seems unlikely that it will ever be used as it was previously. I believe it has the potential to hold 200 plus cars, but there were 3 there when I counted last Friday. This access point from Barkers Road via Vic Roads would clearly make a much more suitable option for the delivery of all potential building requirements. The Vic Roads Road and car park finish directly outside the tennis courts where the construction is to take place. If, say, the 20 car spaces adjacent to the courts were set aside for access to the building site, it would seem to be a very sensible decision, as no residents or pedestrians would be affected. The entire width of this strip of land is perhaps 4 or 5 times wider than Stratford Avenue and would make access and egress much easier and safer, especially as trucks could then turn left to leave the site via Denmark Street. We have been advised that this land is owned or managed by the City of Boroondara and leased to Vic Roads, so surely negotiations between the council, Vic Roads and the school could be undertaken to take advantage of this very realistic and more effective solution. In conclusion, we kindly request that the option of utilising the Vic Roads car park be actively pursued as a much more suitable choice during the construction phase of these buildings, and that Stratford Avenue residents be spared this clearly negative consequence of Xavier's expansion. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. It doesn't appear that there's any questions from councillors, so if you could return to the gallery, please.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is William Doherty from Xavier. If you could come forward, please. And Mr. Doherty, if you can start your presentation with your name and your relationship to the matter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm William Doherty. I'm the principal of Xavier College. I'm a resident of Hawthorn. Good evening, Chair and councillors. As you've heard, I'm joined this evening by fellow representatives from the College Board, the College Executive, to note Geraldine Farrell, who's Chair of our Property and Planning Committee, a member of the College Board, the Director of the Senior Campus, the Director of our Burke Hall Campus, Director of Community Engagements, Shane Healy, and John Lincoln, our College Development Manager. 150 years we turn in 2028, and I'm certainly humbled to be part of a college that is a long-term resident of Kew. As has been noted by the officer, we have restructured our college, and the Cosca Hall campus in Brighton closed at the end of this year, which was very significant and humbling for the college. But it has come as a result of our requirement to move on to 2 campuses and to align the college in a fashion more resembling a typical school of prep to year 6 and year 7 to year 12, hence our restructured proposal. This is, as I said, a very conventional split for schooling. Importantly, through the process, the transition for the college, we have liaised extensively with our students, our staff and parents of the college, and then especially the neighbours and those who we share a common interest in Kew. Those consultation sessions have given various advertising notices and drop-in sessions, and we felt that was important. We also felt it was important to listen deeply and to take action where we felt that was warranted. You listen to reflect and make change. One of the important changes that we've made is that resolution around on-site parking. That will deliver a significant boost and a reduction in impact on our local neighbours, particularly though it comes at some cost to the college. We note that the preference would have been to split our projects as a Year 7 and 8 project and then separately a car park or transport hub. But despite cash flow matters for the college, we felt it was important to be able to respond to the community, and the college has committed now to undertake both of these elements simultaneously so as to be able to provide that parking in timely fashion and a reduction of impact. We are conscious of our child safety environments, and in this changing world it will always remain a priority to the college, and therefore the improvements that we are making to aspects of our design and accessibility, whilst we love to be able to engage with our neighbours, they remain important that we can set a college up to do justice to the protection and education of our students. And so it's with great gratitude that we're here, and I thank the councillors, the officers who have prepared their reports, and our general community for their participation in our process. And I believe that in the combination of our efforts, we'll have a plan to look after Xavier well into the future generations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and I'll just see if there's any questions. There's one from Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Doherty, for presenting to us tonight. I'm curious to just follow on from a point that was raised by the previous speaker in relation to the use of Stratford Avenue and the opportunity to engage with Vic Roads, and if in fact it is land owned by the City of Boroondara, which I'm unaware of, and perhaps leased to Vic Roads. But is that something that you've considered or will consider to reduce the impact to Stratford Avenue residents?
Yeah, I think we're open to all consideration. I might let also my further speaker speak more directly to that with her Transport and Planning Authority, but the college will always remain open to considerations.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I think my question might be better directed to the next speaker as well. Thank you.
Okay, that appears to have exhausted questions, so thank you for your presentation. And our next speaker is Anna Barclay from Urbis. Ms Barclay, if you know the procedure.
I do. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. My name's Anna Barclay. I'm a town planning consultant from Urbis, and we're based in Melbourne.
I'll just get you to drag that mic a little bit closer. Great.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. As Bill mentioned, the college has made the commitment to prioritise the new underground car park to accommodate students and staff moving from the Brighton campus this evening, and will also provide a dedicated drop-off and pick-up area. So the college has worked quite hard in response to some of the concerns you've heard about this evening. The approach to heritage, landscaping and ESD has also been very carefully considered by MGS architects and throughout consultation with Heritage Victoria. The development plan presents a high-quality master plan to guide future planning permits on the site. Over 300 property owners were notified, both formally through the council process on multiple occasions and directly by the college, as well as being invited to a drop-in session, as you've heard this evening. As Bill mentioned, the college has listened to feedback, and the most significant changes have been the removal of the interim car park, which was to be accessed from Stratford Avenue, bringing forward the Chapel Oval underground car park, as I mentioned, and removing the signalised intersection from Barkers Road. Built form changes were also made to reduce the size and height of the Year 7 and 8 building in response to urban design comments and community feedback. In regard to some of the items that were raised by previous speakers, the traffic signals have already been removed from the development plan, so the development plan now simply states that there will be a widened crossover to Barkers Road. Any future proposal to have signals would require the college to go through this process again, so it would require an amendment to the development plan or a new development plan and further approval from both council and the Department of Transport. In regards to the concerns raised in Stratford Avenue, the existing car park that's currently accessed via this street will be removed, and access will be limited to maintenance vehicles only. These maintenance vehicles are associated with the proposed maintenance building, so that's typically utes and small vans for maintenance staff. At this stage, in terms of construction management, that will be dealt with at a planning permit stage. The building hasn't been designed yet. And so that construction management plan that would form part of a planning permit condition would be dealt with at that time. And that will include, as Bill mentioned, exploration of all available sites such as the Vic Road site and consultation with Council's Traffic Department. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. That's all I wanted to say this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. To do with the drop-off spots, how many drop-off spots have you got, and could you describe the configuration? In other words, are they flow-through or are they nose in and back out?
I don't have that level of detail. That'll come with the permit stage, but it is through the basement. So the new underground car park, it will be accessed from Barkers Road, and you'll be able to drive in and then drive back, turn around within the basement car park and drive back out through Barkers Road. And David Trotter from Traffics, who's speaking after me as the traffic engineer, may have some more answers. But in terms of the development plan, that level of detail in terms of the arrangement of car spaces and the like isn't part of this development plan. Will come at the permit stage. But the intention is to be able to turn around and exit from and enter from Barkers Road.
That seems to have exhausted questions, so thank you, Ms Barclay. And Mr Trotter, if you'd like to come forward. And if you could commence your presentation with your name and your role, thanks.
David Trotter, traffic engineer with Traffics Group, who are based in Melbourne. The development plan proposes 3 changes to vehicle access to the college. Firstly, the Barkers Road access is to be widened to allow for the physical separation of entering and exiting motorists. Secondly, right turn exiting traffic onto Barkers Road, other than buses, will be banned on weekdays between 8 and 9:30 a.m. in the morning and 2:30 to 6 in the afternoon. Thirdly, both Stratford Avenue and Gellibrand Street are to be limited to service vehicles only. Our traffic modelling of Barkers Road indicates that the peak hour delay to motorists, both entering and exiting the college, will remain generally consistent with existing conditions. Our traffic modelling of the Charles Street and Hanson Street intersection indicates that this will also operate within acceptable traffic engineering limits, a view which is shared by Council's traffic engineers. Overall traffic volumes within Stratford Avenue are to be generally consistent with existing conditions, noting that the proportion of service vehicles accessing the college via Stratford Avenue will increase. Following the removal of vehicle access for staff and parents to Gellibrand Street, there will be significant reductions to traffic volumes on Gellibrand Street. The proposal has a Boroondara planning scheme requirement to provide at least 36 additional on-site car parks. The proposal includes at least 37 additional car parks outside of school hours and at least 106 additional car parking spaces during school hours, comparative to current requirements. The proposed provision of car parking exceeds Boroondara planning scheme requirements, with the majority of car parking to be consolidated within a new car park underneath the Chapel Oval, which is also proposed to contain a dedicated pick-up and drop-off facility for students. In determining the future transport design of the site, 3 key strategies were identified. Firstly, to connect the campus with a clear and accessible pedestrian spine. Secondly, to prioritise pedestrians. And thirdly, to separate people from cars. We firmly believe that our transport plan for the college achieves these strategies and has been supported by both the Head of Transport, being Vic Roads, and Council's traffic engineers. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Mr Trotter, I'm just wondering if you could clarify for me, please. You said that the increase in parking was above the current requirements. Is that different to, in addition to the current state? Do your current provisions already exceed the current requirements?
Yes, that's correct. So
what's the net gain?
The net gain of spaces. So there's 2 elements of that. The first one, and the numbers I mentioned, are relative to the approved development plan. I can get the other numbers for you, but I would say that they are very close, within 10 or so car parking spaces. Since the 2006 development plan, there has been some changes to car parking configuration in the college. So I'd say the numbers are very much in that order. And if you'd like, I can get those specific numbers for you.
2 officers would be fine. Thank you.
Yep.
There's also a question from Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you've anything to add to the response from the previous speaker regarding the configuration of the drop-off spaces. Is it too early to feed that to us? I am particularly interested in is it a flow-through type arrangement possible?
Yes, absolutely. So as Anna from Urbis elaborated upon earlier, obviously that will be dealt at the planning permit phase, but in order to develop the development plan, there were some preliminary plans that were prepared in order to provide certainty that the provision could be accommodated and costing arrangements and the like. And certainly the preliminary design did envisage essentially a one-way loop around the car park. Essentially there would be a one-way loop around the car park, predominantly incorporating probably in the order of 20 or so parallel bays. They would be seen as, I guess, the high frequency or high drop-off bays. And if you can sort of imagine, if this loop encases the car park, within that loop, there would be what I would call standard or typical 90-degree angled car parking that could obviously be used for pick-up and drop-off, staff parking and other uses as well.
If I might ask a couple more questions. We've talked a couple of times about Stratford, and I'd like to look a little bit further at the sort of predicted increases in traffic, both that you're currently anticipating, both during construction and post-construction. There is some increase anticipated, the type and numbers, if you could.
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, with respect to construction, as previous speakers have noted, obviously there would be a planning permit condition that would require the preparation of a construction management plan. That would also require the preparation typically of a construction traffic management plan that would detail vehicle access to the site, as well as truck volumes, length of duration, operating hours and similar. Certainly at this stage, there hasn't been significant discussions around how that would occur. The building's still to be designed, the constructor's still to be appointed, matters of that nature. I would probably just reaffirm, though, that certainly any options wouldn't be off the table, and I'm sure there are a myriad of different options in terms of access. In terms of post-development, so there's currently a 15-space, give or take, car park that is currently accessible via Stratford Avenue. We did not complete surveys of this car park. It's our understanding, though, that this is not highly utilised, at least for pick-up and drop-off during those key school hours. So there may be some reduction in traffic, obviously, associated with the removal of that car park. In terms of the addition of traffic, as highlighted earlier, predominantly this will occur via utes, vans or things of that nature. It will vary day to day depending on the operations of the school, but in broad terms we've been advised that this would roughly equate to in the order of 5 to 10 vehicles per day. But again, I would expect that would fluctuate throughout the week.
Just one final question, if I may. There was some discussion earlier about Barkers Road and the removal of the lights, which I think we're all very pleased about. There still will be quite a number of right turns in at both morning and afternoon peaks for pick-up and drop-off, I would think. Do you anticipate, or have you looked at with Vic Roads, the need to change the parking arrangements, particularly on the south side of Barkers Road? In other words, will you require, for the volumes anticipated, to increase the parking restrictions along Barkers Road?
So as part of the development plan, we're not proposing any amendments to car parking restrictions along Barkers Road. We've prepared a traffic model on that basis that assumes parking restrictions are retained as per existing conditions, including the current clearway conditions. That traffic model suggests that from a purely traffic engineering perspective, that there wouldn't be a requirement to modify the car parking restrictions or the number of spaces that are restricted along Barkers Road.
Thank you.
And I have a question from Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Trotter. Just with regard to Stratford Avenue again, I know you've talked about the construction management plan and the planning permit in terms of still to be finalised. Have you had conversations with the possibility of avoiding Stratford Avenue and what an alternate access may be?
May I just clarify, does that relate to post-development or are we talking during the construction?
During the construction. Yeah.
No, we've not really had any discussions regarding the construction phase at this time.
All right, look, thank you. I might save my question for officers later. Thank you.
Councillor Gold.
Just want to foreshadow a motion, Chair.
Sure. Okay, Mr. Trotter, that seems to have exhausted all the questions, so Thank you, and you can return to the gallery. And Ms. Split-Gerber for matters arising.
Thank you. To address the submissions made earlier, with regard to the Vic Roads car park, it is noted that it is owned by the Victorian State Government and not council managed land. And any future development and use of the abutting Vic Roads site is currently unknown. However, the development plan has included a potential link with the school and Vic Roads to allow future connection of the site to be explored. It is noted that with regard to the signalised intersection, that the Head of Transport opposes the signalised intersection at Barkers Road, and as such it has been removed from the development plan as well. Any future proposals are subject to approval by the Department of Transport. With regard to the Stratford Avenue, it is acknowledged that it is a narrow street and it will only be used for serviced vehicles only. The proportion of heavy vehicles does refer to small utes and vans for maintenance purposes only and anticipated to be infrequent use during the day. Given only maintenance vehicles will be accessing via Stratford Street, it is anticipated traffic volumes will be infrequent and not exceed beyond existing conditions and therefore are considered acceptable and have been assessed by Council's traffic engineers, which concur with this assessment in that traffic will not be further impacted. As such, with regards to the construction process, a construction management plan would appropriately manage the vehicle movement, controlling vehicles in and out of the site during construction, and these details would be required at the planning permit stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there questions of officers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Ms Spit-Gerber, I just wanted to ask, looking at an aerial map at the moment off Wellington Street, where you turn left onto Stratford Avenue and then directly beside that is a service road to access, I presume, the Vic Roads car park and beyond. I'm trying to determine if that actual service road linking to the car park, is that a council asset? And I can appreciate it might be difficult, but while you're looking at that, what I wanted to ask was if it is a council asset, could that service road be utilised just during the course of construction? Because I can appreciate a project the volume of the size of what's before us here would cause a huge impost on the residents of Stratford Avenue for probably a 2-year period. And just wanted to ask if it could be possible to utilise that access road beside, because that will then come
We've got the question.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, though, it actually then does go right through to the tennis court area, which would be the access point. Thank you.
Just to confirm that it is not part of the managed by Burundara, so it is part of the Vic Road state government land.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I'm wondering if officers have considered the need to possibly change the parking requirements, restrictions on the south side of Barkers Road, directly opposite the access and egress point to the campus, so that if there was a bank up of right turners, city-bound right turners into the campus, there would be the ability for other vehicles to pass. If there was a no standing zone there, if there were parked vehicles, it would obviously be very difficult for city-bound traffic to pass.
Thanks for that question. So the south side of Barkers Road is currently a clearway within 20 to 30 metres of the access point to Barkers Road. So there is no parking availability there.
Sorry, is that at all times?
It's a clearway in the morning between 6:30 and 9:30, yes.
In afternoon school pickup time, is there a clearway there?
During the afternoon, no. No, there isn't.
So my question still remains, have officers considered the need to possibly restrict parking there in the afternoons to enable vehicles to go around any banked up right-turning traffic into the site.
Council's traffic engineers have assessed the traffic report submitted and an assessment of the area and considered that is not necessary as the road network can accommodate the traffic.
Did officers actually specifically address that point in their report?
I don't believe it's been specifically addressed.
Could it be addressed? Because I'm not satisfied that that this won't cause a problem to city-bound traffic in the afternoon if there is a bank up of hundreds of additional parents coming to pick up on campus and the inability for city-bound traffic to pass on a major arterial.
Yes, it can certainly be addressed, and we can take that on notice with our traffic engineers as well.
Thank you, and I've got a second question, if I may, Chair. Just in relation to the question that I asked earlier of Mr Trotter, the increase in parking on site, were officers aware that the increase that was discussed earlier or alluded to is in addition to the current requirements, not the current provision on site?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The college appears to provide in excess of the current requirement. The number of additional car parking spaces provided is on top of the provision, not on top of the current status quo, as I understand it. So what is perceived as a net increase is actually substantially less because they're already providing in addition to the current requirement. Was that made clear to officers?
So the car parking requirement meets the statutory rate and they are providing in excess of that. It is, the car parking provided is to accommodate the reconfiguration per se of current car parking on site and accommodate the extra car parking.
Thanks. It doesn't answer my question, but I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
I have Councillor Galt next, but I just going back to Councillor Sinfield's first question, how does that best get addressed tonight? Ought it be some sort of a notation? I don't know if Mr Storer can give some advice or...
Thanks, through yourself, Chair. That certainly is something that we can take up with the transport team. Often when developments proceed, there are consequences or impacts on the traffic network, and adjustments sometimes need to be made from time to time to respond to the impacts that occur, and that would include car parking restrictions and adjustments to other sorts of controls in and around surrounding streets. So this is one of those sorts of matters that can be followed up with the transport team and reviewed based on the circumstances of what's been proposed.
Councillor Bigger?
Yeah, I know I'm jumping the queue here, but my question is really a follow-up also on that first question with Councillor Sinfield, and I just have a slight concern, and I guess my question is whether or not, I know that residents of Barkers Road were particularly concerned about any parking restrictions or any change to parking. So if it was determined, for instance, that there was a need for a parking clearway in the afternoon, did they express, were the residents able to comment on that as a possible outcome? And was there concern, was there objection about that? Do I need to rephrase that question? It's whether or not...
I think that's clear.
It's whether or not residents would express concern about a clearway on Barkers Road at any time, for instance, in the afternoon, and whether we're not allowing them the opportunity to comment on that if we do make such a change.
through yourself, Chair, we're not aware of the specific issues around parking on Barkers Road being raised by the submissions. If there were to be adjustments to parking, that's something that would be undertaken as part of consultation, further consultation with residents that are affected by those changes.
So I guess one of the questions that arises from that is at what point would councillors hear back in respect of where this has all landed? Mr. Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wanting to, I guess, ask if I could, this is going to be unusual, just ask the team up the front there to indicate whether this application was referred to our traffic engineers and whether they raised concerns about the impacts on Barkers Road. And if they didn't, one would assume they didn't have any. If they did, then what is the remedy? Because I think what councils are struggling with is whether or not this ought to be approved in the first place as a consequence of the impacts they perceive might arise. So I guess I'm just wanting to understand what our traffic engineers actually said about this very question, if anything. And it may well be that if enough councillors are concerned about this and we can't provide responses tonight, then the only solution is to defer consideration so that the responses can be provided to give that assurance.
Thanks. Through yourself, Chair, if I can just perhaps reconfirm, and I think there was some reference made earlier to the application or proposal being referred to Council's traffic and transport engineers. And that would have included and did include the traffic assessments that have been undertaken on behalf of the applicant being referred to the traffic engineers. So the entire proposal with the advice and information provided by the proponents' traffic engineers was reviewed. There were no concerns raised by Council's traffic and transport team in regard to the movements and impact on the traffic network of the proposal. So the assessment undertaken by Council's traffic engineers is saying, based on the information included, what's being proposed, that there is no concerns and there is no need for changes in regard to parking restrictions in Barkers Road or other streets. Now, perhaps the comment that I'd made earlier in referencing this would be something that can be looked at later is in reference to the modelling that occurs with traffic assessments looks at the situation as anticipated and what's proposed. And there is always an obligation on Council to reflect on changes that do actually take place, on what actually does occur at future points in time to see whether there is concern that needs adjustments. And perhaps that's the reference that I was making about that's something that can be looked at a future point in time if there was a consequence that was different to what was anticipated when the proposal is implemented. But based on the review and assessment, there is not expected to be an impact on the traffic network of the proposal.
Councillor Sinfield, do you, before I move to Councillor Galt, do you want to ask anything further in respect of that, or are you?
I would just like to explicitly ask, this proposal in its entirety has been reviewed by Mr Hondrakis and his team?
That's correct.
All right. Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. Could I simply return to the issue of a lighted intersection in Barkers Road? And thank you for clarifying that needs to be a decision of Vic Roads. But can I seek from you some assurance that if a proposal is made in the future and Vic Roads do consider it, that Council will have an opportunity to consider it again at that time? It won't simply be a Vic Roads decision, not brought before this Council.
Again, through yourself, Chair, there are two components. One would be an amendment to the development plan, and that would come back before this Council. The second component would be a referral and comment and advice from Vic Roads, or the head of transport as it's now referred to. So there are the two components, and a tick's needed under both components before that sort of change could take place.
I think Councillor Stavry was next.
Thank you, through you, Chair. My question relates to the trees. I understand about 32 trees will be cut and over 100 would be replanted. My question is, who checks on the ongoing health of the planted trees that they actually grow to full canopy size?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of tree maintenance, part of the planning permit stage will require a tree management plan and a landscape plan, and that requires maintenance options as well. So that would maintain the ongoing viability of the trees that are to be retained and protected on site.
So I guess my question is, on an ongoing manner, how do we know if we approve something that it will actually get done? That's the question.
That's probably a broader policy question for you, Mr Walker.
Thanks, through yourself, Chair. This perhaps is similar to a question that was raised in relation to a planning permit at the UPDC meeting last week. A standard condition that will go on to planning permits relates to the implementation of the landscaping, and that landscaping will need to be in accordance with the plans or landscape plans approved under the planning permit. The second component is a maintenance condition to ensure that the landscaping is maintained in accordance with that plan, and that gives then an ability to and an expectation that any planting that's died or is not maintained in accordance with that plan is replaced and it needs to be maintained. So there's the two components that will go on a standard conditions as part of a planning permit issued. In this case, that planning permit actually sits subsequent to what is being approved here, which is your overall master plan that gives some guidance and expectations for that landscaping. So we're layering through the detail in the planning layers in this case, and then ensuring that the plans are implemented through the specific conditions.
Councillor Beggar.
Yes. So this is the first time that I've been involved, I think, in the endorsement of a development plan, and I'm just trying to, I have a clarification question. So my understanding is that obviously that there would be in the future the need for planning permits for the different aspects of the work. But it does say that these future planning permits would be exempt from notice and appeal rights. That's correct, and that's a state government requirement, not a city requirement or expectation. Is that correct?
Again, through yourself, Chair, the development plan overlay that's been put in place for this site has been put there to support the development of future planning for institutions such as schools. So this is pretty common and pretty typical that these sorts of development plan requirements are put in place for these sorts of institutions. And what it's to avoid the need for is for each proposal that's brought forward by a school, and often schools are doing different projects throughout the year and over years, each of those going through a public notification process. So you could imagine 3 or 4 proposals going through that full public notification process. So it's one, so that the community understands the full picture of what's happening over a period of time on the site, and that the full public input occurs at that stage, and that's what this development plan sits there for. So it sits there as that overall plan. But what that means is that then the subsequent planning permits do not go through that public notice process, assuming or on the basis that it's in accordance with that overall plan. Now, that's the model that's set up by the state government requirements under the development plan overlay.
And so, in terms of what you just said, that's an assumption that it was in accordance with the overall development plan. Who determines whether or not it is in accordance? Do we have the opportunity as the council to determine whether or not it's in accordance with that development plan?
again through yourself, Chair, that's a matter of fact, but we won't have the direct control over the planning permits in many cases if it's over the $3 million trigger, given the change to the planning scheme. Historically, Council would have had control over all of those permits. Having said that, Council will get the opportunity to comment on those when they're considered by the Department of Planning, because Council will receive the referral and will provide comment on that. And it's a matter of fact that it must be in accordance with the development plan. So there's always an avenue of pursuing an argument that it's not in accordance with that plan if it was to be done so outside of that process.
Chair, could I have one follow-on? Thank you. So then, at the risk of flogging this dead horse on the Barkers Road, were there to be, as you suggested a minute ago, an amendment to the development plan, for instance, involving potential clearway on Barkers Road, would that include notice and appeal rights? Do all amendments to development plans include those? Is that a clear question?
Thanks. Through yourself, Chair, just seeking some clarification there. If it was a minor change to the development plan, then formal notice would not be required. That would be for minor changes to development plan. So again, it would be that trigger around is there detriment or potential detriment of the change to the development plan. So minor changes could occur to the development plan without going through that full process, just like any planning permit or amendment to a planning permit would meet those sorts of triggers as well. Having said that, there is perhaps a area or a grey area around changes to parking on a main road or on surrounding streets, because that's not formally covered by the development plan. The development plan is relating to the site and is not necessarily covering the surrounding road network, which makes that perhaps that little bit of a grey area in that there is reference to the impact on the surrounding road network that's a consequence of the development on the site. Now, that's often what happens with planning permits or planning approvals, that there is a relationship between that development occurring and what's happening on the surrounding road network, but there is then a situation where there might be changes on a road network that occur that are independently decided that are not covered by that development plan.
I'm sorry, but just to clarify, then does that mean that any decisions that were, because there's been reference by several of our questioners, for instance, tonight, about the residents saying they wanted a commitment about Barkers Road, and I think Xavier saying that they were, committed to hearing this. But in fact, it sounds like from what you've just said that decisions that we're making tonight are actually not regarding what will or won't be done on Barkers Road are actually not indicative of what may or may not happen in the next few years. Is that correct? I'm sorry if I'm being difficult. I'm just really trying to understand this.
No, I don't think you're being difficult. I think it's important that councillors actually understand, and I think while officers contemplate that, the Councillor Galt has foreshadowed a motion, and we don't yet know what that is, but of course, if there are enough councillors concerned about the answers to the traffic concerns, then the next meeting of the EPC is the 7th of February, so there would be the opportunity to defer consideration to that meeting. So I don't know what, we might just understand what Councillor Galt's intending to move.
if you're happy for me to comment on that, I was satisfied that the process with regard to the overall plan had been gone through and I was satisfied. But I do agree that there's questions around Barker's Road and the treatment of parking during the afternoon peak. I don't think that's been satisfactorily addressed or answered. Adding to that, I did put that question in writing earlier today, and I don't believe that was answered either. So, you know, we could either move forward conditional upon that being satisfactorily answered, because it is not the first time this has happened. It must happen at MLC and a number of other sites along Barker's Road. Alternatively, we could hold approval until that's resolved through the officers and back to council again.
Mr Walker.
Can I just perhaps make a further comment, and it perhaps maybe doesn't get you to the point that you...
Well, we might just start with Councillor Bigger's answer first, if you're in a position to.
Yep. I don't believe that the development plan and what we include in the development plan can control future changes that might take place or might be decided in relation to parking in surrounding streets. So the development plan itself, I don't believe, could prevent that. There might be a whole range of reasons or changes or things that occur that might mean that the council seeks to review parking in surrounding streets into the future. So there might be other changes that happen in Barker's Road as a result of increase in traffic or other developments nearby that change the parking relationship in the street. Now that is a decision at a future point in time that the council could make and will need to make in relation to parking. It's something that council does. It manages parking in surrounding streets. I don't believe that the development plan on a particular site can control those future circumstances and purport to control those future circumstances that might be impacted by other things. Yes, it might be a consequence of some of the change to this particular site and the behaviour that drivers undertake. So if the question is, would this be something that would trigger a re-review of the development plan into the future, the answer is not necessarily no, because council will need to make decisions around parking management into the future for a whole bunch of reasons, and this could be one of those.
Mr Storer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I was just wanting to clarify. It seems to me the concern being raised by councillors is whether or not the development plan approval is in fact going to result in an unacceptable outcome on Barker's Road. So it's not so much whether the development plan can control what happens in Barker's Road, but whether or not approval is going to produce an unacceptable outcome there. So I guess I just want to ask the team to comment specifically on that. And if you're not in the position to comment on that, it would seem to me there's a question there which councillors would need to have answered to be able to make a decision. So perhaps if that could be addressed quite specifically, that is, will approval of the development plan, in our view, result in an unacceptable outcome on Barker's Road?
Thanks again, through yourself, Chair. The Head of Transport, Vic Rhodes, has reviewed the proposal and has not raised any concern with the impact on Barker's Road. And that includes taking into account the parking restrictions that currently apply, that is the morning clearway zone and the afternoon being no clearway heading city-bound. So the Head of Transport, Vic Rhodes, who has responsibility for main roads and in particular Barker's Road, has not raised concern and does not have concern with the proposal. So that's quite clear. As I say as well, the matter has been referred to Council's Transport and Traffic team and no concerns have been raised there either.
All right. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I wonder whether you might afford me a comment rather than a question at this point.
as long as it's brief.
My concern is that the guidance that's been provided, I feel, is short-sighted rather than the large strategic overview of this site, and I don't think that it is unreasonable to think that there will be flow-on effects for Barkers Road and Barkers Road residents and visitors to their property. So for Mr Walker to say that we can review things subsequent to the development if there are problems doesn't satisfy me that we're doing our job sufficiently at this point. I think we need to look at the very likely flow-on effects now rather than in a couple of years down the track when we get complaints about parking and congestion on Barkers Road. So hundreds of vehicles accessing and egressing the site is not unforeseen.
I wonder, from Xavier's perspective, if there's any time criticality. If we don't deal with this tonight, it would come to us on the 7th of February. Is the headmaster still present? I'm not sure if he's in a position, and if, with your indulgence, councillors, but would you be in a position to just, in short compass, answer that for me?
Certainly. Yeah, we are in a time-critical position to enable us to achieve the educational imperatives that we're seeking to be able to achieve by 2024. It is time-critical.
So what we'd be talking about in this scenario, if it's not resolved tonight, we'd be dealing with it on the 7th of February. Would that?
No, that wouldn't be. In a matter of our good governance as well, we have to seek our own financial approvals and planning approvals through the Society of Jesus that goes all the way through to Rome, and that is on a critical path.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
So, are there any more questions? If not, then what I'd propose to do is hand back to Councillor Galt. I still have concerns personally about this, but I think at the end of the day, a call needs to be made. So, Councillor Galt, it's whichever way you proceed, either that it will succeed or it'll fail, and then it'll be obvious what's going to happen. So, over to you.
Balancing up the issues we've discussed this evening, I would be prepared to go with the officer's recommendations with one additional clause at the end, that immediately we also pursue more details on the effects in Barkers Road of the increased use of that larger entry-exit from the campus.
Let's put that up and see if it's captured your intent before I seek a seconder.
And if I could just maybe add that we attempt to resolve any issues arising from that with Vic Roads.
Let's say Vic Roads.
I don't think it's going to be a major issue with Vic Roads.
Yeah.
Because it happens now. It happens at MLC now with 2,000 services. What's the authority we're going to be referring to anyway?
Put in there, and let's say AV growth. It is what it is. We don't like it. What do we do then?
There would be restricted parking around there anyway, I would think.
We will change the parking.
I don't think we're going to change the parking. That what you have to advise the residents if we're going to do that.
But it's Vic Road's right. We can't do it here.
Well, that's right. We said we can't do it.
So let's say we don't like the traffic outcome. Vic Road says we're okay.
We can be difficult on the detailed planning approvals. You're right, it does create a problem.
Yeah, look, let's put that up and see. So, Councillor Galt, we'll just see if that reflects what you had in mind. There we go. Councillor Galt and councillors, if you can just have a look at that firstly before I take any further.
Chair, with your indulgence, I seek a question before the motion is put.
All right, I'll allow that.
Thank you. I'm just trying to decipher page 49 of the papers that we have in front of me, and I'm just seeking clarification with the outbound lanes from the campus, or the college. If there was a bus outbound waiting to turn right onto Barker's Road, and I note that buses are exempt from the no right turn in the AM, the PM, in fact, at all times, are vehicles other than buses able to turn left at the same time? Is it sufficiently wide at that crossover for a bus to be waiting to turn right and vehicles to turn left simultaneously, assuming they had visibility to do so safely? But I can't decipher that on page 49.
That's with reference to the swept path analysis.
Yes.
So is there an officer here who actually can comment on that? Mr. Hondrakis was here, but he's no longer here, is he? No. Mr. Storer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just wanted to advise the applicant has just advised me through their planning consultant they are comfortable with what's up there. They've already done some work on this and they're very comfortable with item 2 being incorporated in the decision council makes.
Thank you. So, who's the lucky officer to respond to Councillor Sinfield's question?
To respond to your question, it is only a single lane, and the traffic assessment has concluded that even if there is a bus waiting to turn out of the Barkers Road exit, that the internal road network can accommodate the traffic waiting to turn.
Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that, number 2, and trying to understand what exactly, what will be done with that information, what that will mean, because we haven't clarified. We're going to get information, but then we've got to be saying something about that information some question that it answers, right? Because for me, that's just very vague right now.
I think what you say is probably true. You would need to read it in conjunction with the very first paragraph at the top.
Yes.
But it still probably needs a little bit of tightening, and that's really down to Councillor Galt to tell us whether that has captured his intent or not. Although I think for me and probably for others, I think there still remains the bigger question of whether this can actually be dealt with tonight, given the information before us. But Councillor Galt, do you have anything more to offer on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think it needs an action statement added to it because the outcome is not clear from that point 2. I think what we're aiming at by adding the additional information is to resolve the issues with regards to access during the afternoon peak, and that it will not detrimentally affect adjoining residents.
Mr. Storer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, what the staff would do with this is that when you read the preamble, essentially the information below needs to be provided to the satisfaction of the staff as part of the final endorsement, and therefore the staff would not be providing that endorsement unless the information in item 2 was provided to our satisfaction. What we've heard already tonight is that the body responsible for the road has said it actually has no concerns with the proposal. So essentially, really, the bit that's perhaps seeking further clarification here is the specifics around the Traffic and Transport Department's comments in relation to the issues which are being raised. But we would look at this and say, well, unless we're satisfied, we can't actually endorse the plan, in which case it would come back here for a decision. So essentially what you're doing is saying to the staff, we're entrusting you to satisfy yourselves that the concerns being raised by councillors have been adequately addressed. That's essentially what the implications of that would be.
All right, thank you. So look, I think Councillor Galt needs to just consider whether, in view of that, the motion it needs any further tweaking before it's seconded. But I'll allow one final opportunity in an endeavour to see where we get to. Are there any further questions that have arisen for councillors, given the what's transpired? Councillor Franco.
Look, for me, this additional motion doesn't sit in. I'm probably flagging discussion, but I can't support the second motion. I don't think it's relevant. I think it could be dealt with in general business if there's a need for a separate discussion about traffic movements there, but I don't think it's relevant to the motion. I think it confuses the matter, and I just can't say
all right, that's probably more debate, but yep. So there don't seem to be any questions. So back to you, Councillor Galt.
I think we're nearly there, and I think the issue of not adversely affecting the adjoining residents is still outstanding. So subject to the satisfaction of the responsibility to the responsible authority that the interests of the adjoining residents will not be adversely affected. If we can add that, I think we've covered the point. It's a bit long-winded, my apologies, but Put that forward.
Can I suggest the word unacceptably in there? Because they will be adversely affected beyond doubt.
Yep.
Whether it's to an acceptable or unacceptable level is what is being discussed.
I'd be happy with the use of those words.
Does that reflect the intent of Councillor Galt now?
Councillor Galt?
Happy with that, thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to move the motion with the addition of clause 2.
And just before I seek a seconder, Mr. Story, you don't have any concerns about that that final part there? That'll work in terms of the administration?
Yes, it will. Of course, these are subjective judgments, which we all need to understand, will have to be made.
All right, so I'll see if there's a seconder.
I wanted to ask a question, but
a very quick question.
Just through you of the CEO, how will this second motion work? Will officers decide if residents are unreasonably affected, if they decide that they are affected in some way, include clauses that are of the view of officers? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, as I mentioned earlier, the officers will need to satisfy themselves that the proposal will not have an unreasonable impact from the point of view of the adjoining residents on the function and operation of the road network, be that traffic or parking. And if they come to the view that it will not, then it will have satisfied that test and the plan can be endorsed. If they reach an alternative view and that cannot be resolved through discussion with the applicant, then they would need to refuse to endorse the plans, and that may actually result in the matter coming back here for consideration.
I think I need to draw a line there and say, let's then debate it. So is there a seconder? Councillor Stavrou, you're seconding?
I am, but I see a problem, particularly when we say regarding vehicular traffic movements. It should be increased vehicular traffic movements, because as it reads, it relates to status quo, potentially.
So, Councillor Galt, are you fine with the word increased being added?
Happy with the addition of that word.
All right, that's the motion. So for the assistance of Councillor Galt, is there opposition to that motion? There is opposition. Councillor Galt. You speak to your motion. Yeah.
Very much indeed.
Whoop. Briefly, if you could.
Live in hope. I have followed this master plan through a number of its stages. I was very pleased to see that many changes were made during the process, taking into account the concerns of adjoining residents and traffic issues on the road. And I believe that the college has been accommodating in adjusting its plans to facilitate the concerns. I also think it's a very, very big campus, and I think it's had the good fortune to be able to make those changes because of the fortunate size of them. So it's a well thought through plan. I think it's well considered, and it considers the surrounding residents. So I would recommend acceptance of the officer's motion with the addition of clause 2 tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Stavrou.
I will reserve my rights. Or can I?
Oh, I'd rather you didn't. It's a bad habit we've got into where it becomes like two rights of reply. So if you wouldn't mind.
That's no problem. There's opposition. That's why I mentioned it. I echo Councillor Gold's words. In addition to obviously being close to my ward, I've taken very active interest in this, spoken to the office at length, and I'm actually very, happy with the way that the school has approached the whole master plan. I think the addition that has been added to the motion might go some way in giving us the information that we may need. Having been driving children in and out from MLC for the past 17 years, I know that the existing problems are there too, so it has to be considered in that light. With that regard, I endorse the motion.
Thank you. Are there other speakers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I'll speak in opposition. Largely, I think the application's 95% correct. I do admire the work that's gone into the master plan and appreciate all the work the officers have had with their assessment of it. But I'm extremely concerned about the impact of what I can estimate as at least 10 residential properties in Strathfield Avenue. And at this stage, we haven't been provided any assurance that major construction heavy vehicle access will not be utilising their street. And I'll just comment a little bit further on my concerns. There's a residential property in the Linden ward that I've been elected to represent, a corner site. We're talking one residential property that has an underground basement. And
I'm just sorry, but I'm going to have to steer you back to this matter.
well, it's just relevant to the point that when there's excavation for underground basement, on one site alone, there was over 80 vehicle movements of trucks completely full going to waste, but obviously all the heavy excavation equipment as well. Now, that's just one example of one site. The impost on this street, if the vehicle access was to utilise it, I think would be unfair on the residents for a 2-year period, and that's why I can't support this application unless there could be an amendment to incorporate a willingness to liaise with Vic Roads to access their service road as an alternate route. That's the only way I could support this.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. I commend the college for being responsive to many of the concerns raised by the neighbours. However, I am still concerned about the impacts to the neighbourhood, particularly with regard to the maintenance area. And we've seen another large private school in the municipality have ongoing negative interactions with the neighbourhood in relation to their maintenance yard and bay and the heavy vehicles, tractors and bits and pieces coming and going from that area. So I am a little worried about that. I encourage the college to engage further with Vic Roads in consideration of utilising that possible tract of land to avoid conflict with the neighbours, and encourage consideration of 2 lanes of egress there and perhaps a modification of the traffic island to allow the flow of traffic off the college campus. Naturally, if parents are waiting for 4 buses to leave the site and they're queued up behind it, they will be trying to find different places for their drop-off and pick-up in the days thereafter, and that will have flow-on effects into the neighbouring streets and amenity impacts to the neighbours of the campus, and that causes me concern. But I'm happy to support this motion, and I'm satisfied with the inclusion of the second clause. Thank you.
Anyone else before I return to Councillor Galt? Councillor Franco.
I'm a little bit torn on how to approach and vote for this motion. I'm prepared to support point 1 and support the proposal that's before us. I'm a little bit concerned about clause 2, the additional clause, and to the extent that officers have said that our Transport and Traffic Department's okay with it and the Vic Road is okay with it, then I question what is going to transpire. I presume that there will be no change whatsoever and therefore that it's an innocuous motion, which is going to have no impact. But if officers decide and use their judgment and their discretion to include additional clauses that we may be unaware of, it's an awkward situation as an elected council, as a committee, to make a decision that provides that discretion. So I'm a little bit uneasy with the nature of that clause for those reasons. I mean, it sounds good. They're nice words that adjoining residents are not unreasonably affected. But what does that mean? And in practice, let's deal with one of the big issues. Are we going to use this to introduce extended clearways in Barker's Road in the afternoon peak? And if that's the real issue, then I don't think we should be using this. It'd be done in that way. It should be a discussion around that specifically. This is a very vague way of dealing with the extension of clearways. So, look, I'm going to flag that I'll vote against it, but understand that if the motion is put as one and were it to fail, I'll vote for point one with a revised motion.
Thank you. My contribution to the debate is that I'm going to support the motion that's been moved, albeit reluctantly. I personally would have preferred to see it come back in February with the matters raised in paragraph 2 having been dealt with, but I do accept that causes some problems for Xavier, and I think that on balance we can suitably address the concerns that a number of councillors have by mechanism of paragraph 2. So on that basis, I'm going to support the motion. I don't see this as some clandestine way to extend clearways. That's not what it's about. It certainly isn't for me, and I don't think it is for anyone else who's spoken. I think, though, that there are significant issues that will be exacerbated by this development plan as it comes to fruition, and so I see those points raised in paragraph 2 as entirely appropriate. Is there any other speakers before I return to the mover? Councillor Galt.
Thank you, Chair. No real further comments except to say that I have every confidence that the officers will carry out the requirements of assessing the effects on the adjoining owners quite properly. Thank you.
I put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That motion is carried. So that takes us then to item 3.2. Improving the operation of Res Code, and that will be presented by Senior Strategic Planner Michaela Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Victorian Department of Education, Land, Water and Planning has released a discussion paper entitled...
Just might need you to bring that mic a little bit closer.
Is that better?
That is.
Sorry
yes,
about
thanks.
that. The Victorian Department of Education, Land, Water and Planning has released a discussion paper entitled Improving the Operation of Res Code. Feedback on this paper is due by the 17th of December 2021. The discussion paper proposes a new assessment process for all residential development applications made under Res Code in Victorian planning schemes. The new model seeks to standardise how assessment provisions work to deliver more consistent, digital-ready assessment provisions, improve processing times, and to improve clarity for all users. It is important to note that no changes are proposed to permit triggers, third-party notice or review rights, nor the quantitative Res Code standards themselves. The existing Res Code framework requires the consideration of a proposal against the relevant objective, standard and decision guidelines before deciding whether an application meets the objectives. Meeting the numerical requirement of the standard is not considered to automatically meet the objective. Under the proposed new performance assessment model, known as a PAM, the existing Res Code objectives will be split into the consideration of performance measures, which are quantitative, and performance criteria, which are qualitative. Critically, the key difference would be that if the performance measure is met, the proposal is deemed to have met the objective and therefore comply. No further consideration could be given to the performance criteria, nor broader policy objectives which are currently able to be considered in decision-making. Officers have reviewed the discussion paper and, while acknowledging the need to improve the operation of assessment provisions, hold a number of concerns with the proposal. Officers consider that the proposal places too much emphasis on standardised numerical measures, while removing Council's ability to undertake a nuanced contextual assessment. The proposal represents a first step to a code-assessed model, which could limit Council's ability to assess development proposals against Council's neighbourhood character policy, design response and local context, as well as any other relevant local policy. It is therefore considered that the proposed model is not suitable to apply to all of the current Res Code standards, and particularly those that relate to neighbourhood character. There are also strong concerns about the implementation process, including its timing and the need for further detailed consultation. While the inclusion of the neighbourhood character policy objectives in the relevant residential zone schedule is supported in theory, in practice it is unclear to what extent and how quickly existing local policy can in fact be translated into the new residential zone schedules. Council will need time to undertake further strategic work, likely including a significant planning scheme amendment to update the local neighbourhood character controls in response to these changes. The draft submission at attachment 2 of tonight's report discusses these concerns in greater detail. Officers recommend the submission be endorsed by the committee before being provided to the department for their consideration. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Then I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Stavrou.
I have a question.
Too late. Go on.
You're going to hear it anyway. It's a clarifier. So the way that I understand it is that what's proposed here is effectively a scorecard to be able to assess a digital-ready application to assume whether it satisfies the criteria or not, with a bunch of quantitative and qualitative criteria. And there's the issue. Has DELP provided some sort of study to give you a guidance of how efficacious these things are for this particular type of decision? Because this is a broader decision, I guess, science, if you will, where knowledge exists of how these things operate, and you can actually get a study to actually inform us whether they'll be efficacious or not. Have they provided that?
Through yourself, Mr. Chair, it's interesting. A discussion paper has been provided by the Department of Planning, and what the discussion paper does is try to explain how the existing system, which is a performance-based system, is leading to uncertainty. And that's what the argument is that that's leading to uncertainty, and that this new planning assessment model will create greater certainty. The issue that comes with that is it is true that greater certainty can be provided by providing prescriptive requirements, but the whole basis of a performance-based system is to actually ensure that the quality of the outcome is still achieved, and it's a good outcome irrespective of ticking the box. Because a development that ticks the box may not necessarily be a good outcome or a quality outcome. And that was the whole reason for the system going back 15 years when Res Code was developed, was put in place in the way it was. It was about being able to assess a development around a series of criteria and standards that gave some guidance around it. But if the standard didn't meet the criteria around a good outcome, then a judgment could still be made by the planners in relation to that outcome. So that's what the explanation is in the discussion paper around the analysis that's been done to say why this is needed. What it does do is set up potentially a model for future PAMs, planning assessment modules, for other types of planning applications as well. So this is setting a framework that potentially will then be applied to other situations. So shifting the whole system, if you like, to much more of a tick-the-box system than a performance-based system that it is now.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Happy to support officer's recommendation at the appropriate time.
I think that's now, so I'll take that as you moving the motion, and I'm therefore in search of a seconder, and that's Councillor Gillies, to assist. Yes, Councillor.
I was going to suggest the inclusion of a third clause and just that a copy of our submission be provided to the Shadow Minister for Planning, our Upper House member and my good friend David Davis, in addition to anyone else that might be thought worthwhile by officers.
Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to incorporate that into your motion?
Be very happy to incorporate that, thank you.
Perhaps it could be a little broader and cover the members of State Parliament who represent the City of Boroondara.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yes.
And Councillor Gillies is fine with that. To assist Councillor Hollingsworth, is there any opposition? It doesn't appear to be, so Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And I will speak very briefly. Again, applaud the officers for putting together the 14-page report. And I do like the introduction to the report where it clearly states that what's proposed could result in weakening of the local planning policies and also jeopardise our neighbourhood character, neighbourhood precinct statements. And I'll just touch on a few other points that I've highlighted here. The report clearly articulates there's concerns with building height, with street setbacks, with landscape, with permeability, with overlooking. There's quite a breadth of, let's just say, deficiencies in what's proposed that certainly warrants more clarification. And I commend the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. That takes us then to item 4, general business. There's no general business. Item 5, urgent business. Item 6, confidential business. Then I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.